Chapter 360. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type dread, and tell me quietly. The purple arc of light still remained in the air. The next moment, the body of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife flew like snowflakes in the sky and turned into pure energy dissipating in the air. Not good. The scene in front of him made Soren frown. The fallen witch behind him also changed her expression greatly. She raised her hand and threw out a level 9 spell. Soul Trap. An invisible energy barrier shrank, and there was a faint strange whisper. This spell must be chanted with blasphemous words because it could imprison the soul of any enemy. Unfortunately, when the fallen witch finished casting, the body of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had turned into energy and dissipated. Only 2 or 3 pieces of equipment fell from the air with the wind. Vivian quickly reached out and caught them, and then directly fell in front of Soren. It's life hiding. The fallen witch landed on the ghost ship with a complicated expression and said in a deep voice, I didn't expect a sorcerer to master this legendary spell. It seems that we still underestimated her too much. Legendary spell. The spell that just worked on the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was a top-level spell that was comparable to Time Stop. Life Hiding, legendary spell. Legendary spellcasters can isolate their own vitality to a certain part of the body, then take it down and keep it in a safe place. In this way, you can't be killed by any conventional means, and you are immune to most paralysis, near death, and death effects. If the body is destroyed by the enemy, then a part of the preserved vitality can be resurrected through a body reconstructed by cloning. Note, life hiding can transform the body into a semi-energy state and be immune to most negative effects. Cloning, level 8 spell, create a body copy without vitality. After death, your soul will immediately be transferred to the body with the soul imprint to be resurrected. The cloned body copy needs to be cultivated in the laboratory for several months. After resurrection, your level will be reduced by 1 level. There is a certain chance of failure during the cloning process, and it requires a lot of materials to cultivate. Note, cloning requires a large alchemy laboratory. Legendary wizards were the most difficult to kill. One of the reasons was the legendary spell, Life Concealment. It could isolate the life force of a legendary spellcaster in a certain location, and then take it down and store it in a safe place. This was a bit like the phylactery of a lich, but as a legendary flesh spell, Life Concealment had higher requirements. This legendary spell required a huge amount of wealth to cast, as well as a certain amount of soul energy. However, its use was also very shocking. Let alone the fallen witch, even Soren didn't expect that a legend-ranked dragon warlock would be able to learn this spell. After all, the spells of a warlock were mostly based on their understanding. This spell was very difficult to master, and it required a lot of alchemy skills. Many legendary wizards might not be able to master this spell. The legendary mages were high and mighty. To a large extent, it was because of this spell that they could have an extra life, which made them much more relaxed than other legendary professions. And this was because the arcane empire had been destroyed. Otherwise, in the literature recorded by the wizards, the arcanists also had an advanced version of life concealment. That was, after the death of the body, the arcanists could directly use the preserved part of the body to resurrect. There was no need for cloning at all. In that case, the only way to kill a legendary arcanist was to destroy their soul. The pirate king Ashrod was killed by Soren. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was penetrated by the crystal pulse cannon, and then dissipated into the air with the wind. The enemies who were in the middle of the battle were stunned. The eastern pirates reacted the fastest. They almost didn't think too much and immediately turned around to escape the battlefield. The second to react was the navy of the Principality of Rossard. They clearly had the advantage on the flank, but under the command of the commander, they made a prompt decision to retreat from the battlefield. The last to react were the pirate king Ashrod's subordinates. They had been beaten so badly that they wanted to escape. Some of them even planned to escape to the raging sand island behind them. Victory! Soren glanced at the defeated enemy and reached out to stop Vivian, who was ready to chase after them. He said in a deep voice, "Don't underestimate the enemy. There are still dragon disciples nearby." The power of a duchy was not that weak. If they had not caught the Duke of Red Dragon's wife off guard, they would have had to ask Gloria to open the portal to support them. There was a portal in the captain's room of the dead man's voice. It was connected to the laboratory in the outer islands. Gloria could teleport to the ghost ship at any time through the portal. This was why Soren was not afraid. There was a burst of cheers. The defeated enemy made Soren's men braver and fiercer. Many pirates raised their weapons and cheered for victory. However, the next moment, their cheers came to an abrupt end. This was because a huge wave had appeared in the distance. It was a huge wave that was as tall as a 10-story building. This huge wave was like a blue sky curtain approaching the battlefield. The huge wave that was dozens of miles long enveloped everyone within it. Under the huge wave, no warship could survive. They would be easily lifted and smashed like paper and eventually sink to the bottom of the sea. Tsunami, legendary spell. The huge wave pushed forward like a wall. In front of it, all the warships were so small. The cheers turned into screams. All the pirates on the battlefield, regardless of whether they were enemies or allies, were like headless flies. They were all covered by the legendary spell, Tsunami. The Eastern pirates, who were the fastest at the beginning, had already brought their warships close to the range of the tsunami spell. Under the huge waves of more than 10 stories high, their warships were overturned like toys. They did not even have the chance to make a splash. They were directly smashed into pieces and sank into the sea. There was basically not much chance of survival for the sailors on board. Damn Naga Siren Priest. Soren's face was quite ugly at the moment. He seemed to be angry and roared, "Didn't she say that the Naga Siren royal family would not do anything?" Tsunami. The signature spell of the Naga Siren. In the whole south coast area, except for the priests of the sea goddess, Soren could not think of anyone else who could cast this terrible legendary spell. This spell had the ability to destroy a port city. Maybe it could not threaten a strong man like Soren. After all, he had many ways to save his life in the face of a tsunami. But the men he brought, the fleets under his command, the defeated enemies, and the spoils of war were almost impossible to be intact under such a terrible tsunami. If the power of this tsunami broke out, even the raging sand island behind would be submerged. The huge wave of more than 10 stories high was enough to destroy everything. Soren's victory would eventually become a ruin. Rewind time to 5 minutes ago. Somewhere on the bottom of the sea, a group of heavily armed Naga guards were scattered around. In the middle was a group of female Naga with a strange face. In front of them was a mirror made of seawater. "Your Excellency." A female Naga sorcerer looked at the mirror and said slowly, "Ashrod has failed. He was killed by the throat cutter." "Humph." A cold snort rang out, followed by a cold voice that slowly spoke from behind, "That useless trash. He was afraid to deal with the Swamp King, and now he is still useless against the throat cutter. Get ready to cast. Let these humans be buried in the sea." The Naga wizard next to her nodded, and then a strange chant sounded. This was the language of the sea Naga. As they chanted, a huge wave gradually rose from the sea. The height of the wave was getting more and more amazing. In the end, it almost turned into a blue sky and pushed forward. Sea Temple. In front of the Naga Siren priest was a mirror made of seawater. Her expression at the moment was quite complicated. She seemed to be hesitating and struggling. Her eyes were locked on the approaching tsunami waves in the mirror. It seemed that she was making a difficult choice. "Your Excellency." A low voice came from the dark sea and said slowly, "If Your Excellency is not willing to do it, it is better to let them be killed by the tsunami. Most of the elite pirates on the south coast have gathered here. If they all die in battle, even if the throat cutter survives, there will be no one to use. In this way, we can take the opportunity to gain more benefits." The Naga Siren priest shook her head gently and said, "It is difficult to kill them with tsunami. At most, it can only kill the mortals present and destroy all the warships. But in that way, the forces on the south coast will become a vacuum. This may not be a good thing for us. Let the others get ready to cast. We need to pray for the incarnation of the sea goddess to come. The terrible tsunami was approaching. Many people closed their eyes in despair and firmly grasped the hull of the ship. Under this terrible wave, they could only pray for fate because they had no way to escape within the range of tsunami. Fly. 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 When the terrible tsunami appeared, Soren and others had already cast spells quickly. The few spell slots could not save so many people. Even if Vivian and Fallen which were present, they could only use fly to bring a few people to the sky. The terrible tsunami was getting closer and closer. The huge wave of more than 10 stories high made people feel desperate and suffocated. But when the tsunami in front of them was about to sweep them away, suddenly there was a strange sound of a conch. Then, a wave rose from the center of the battlefield, and the sea water stirred like a whirlpool. The blue sea water automatically gathered into a figure that was more than 10 meters tall. She stood in the middle of the whirlpool, holding a trident in her hand. She gently pointed at the tsunami that was sweeping toward her. Then, the huge wave in front of her gradually disappeared, as if everything that had happened just now was an illusion. The Sea Temple. There was a dull voice in the sea, and slowly said, "Your Excellency. The other sea priests have been summoned. You can cast the spell now. Your Excellency. Your Excellency." The voice in the sea seemed to be a little anxious. A strange tentacle appeared in the dark and deep darkness. The Naga siren priest still stood in place, but at this moment, the expression on her face was stiff, and there was a faint feeling of panic brewing. It was because in the mirror image formed by the seawater in front of her, the figure of a goddess holding a trident appeared. She stood in the middle of the whirlpool as if she was the ruler of the sea. As she raised her hand and gently pointed forward, the shocking tsunami dissipated into nothingness. The sea goddess. The Naga siren priest felt cold at the moment. Her heart was full of fear because she had not yet cast the spell to pray for the incarnation of the sea goddess to come. The incarnation of the sea goddess in front of her appeared by herself. What did this mean? Just thinking about it made her tremble, and she could not help but panic. Back to a week ago. Soren was preparing for the decisive battle with the pirate king Ashrod. Because of the experience of defeating the Swamp King last time, he held a very simple sacrificial ceremony before leading the fleet to set off. This was really a very simple sacrificial ceremony. The sacrifice was to the sea goddess. Soren didn't even say a few words of prayer. In general, he was ready to give the head of the pirate king Ashrod to the sea goddess and dedicate this battle to her as a sacrifice. It was that simple. After all, Soren still needed the blessing of the sea goddess. Anyway, this battle was inevitable, so it was better to greet the sea goddess in advance. Maybe there would be additional benefits if he won. When he killed the Swamp King, Soren had the blessing of the sea goddess, so his prayer was different from ordinary believers. It was not even lighter than the prayers of the priests. If he prayed for the sacrifice, the sea goddess would definitely hear it. Because the blessing and favor of the gods was equivalent to deepening the connection between the two. The sea goddess could perceive Soren's prayer, and even pay more attention to it than ordinary sea priests. As for whether the sea goddess liked his sacrifice, and whether she would listen to his prayer, no one knew. After all, the sea goddess was also known to be temperamental. The terrible tsunami gradually dissipated. The frightened pirates raised their heads and looked forward. When they saw the figure of the sea goddess standing in the whirlpool, the blackheads knelt down, and some people prayed in a trembling voice. The incarnation of the gods had come to the mortal world. The sea goddess did not come in person. It was just a temporary body made of seawater. She did not care about the mortals kneeling on the deck, but turned her eyes to Soren not far away. The gaze of the gods. As if there was endless pressure, the sea goddess glanced at Soren, and then seemed to be quite satisfied and nodded gently. She raised the trident in her hand and pointed forward, and then saw the three-headed sea snake with 3 heads curled up from the bottom of the sea. It seemed to have heard something, and gradually swam to Soren, and lowered its head like a servant. The whirlpool gradually shrank. The incarnation of the sea goddess looked into the distance, and her brows seemed to be slightly frowning. Then her figure dissipated in the whirlpool and turned back into the blue sea water. Everything just now was like an illusion. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's public account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Now follow Dread's WeChat public account. Chapter 361. P.S. Look at the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss. Listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese network's public account. Add friends on WeChat. Add public account. Type Dread, and tell me quietly. Under the dark night sky. Soren stood on the dock of Raging Sand Island and looked into the distance. This night was destined to be a happy one and a sad one. Soren certainly defeated the pirate king Ashrod and unified the pirate forces on the south coast in one fell swoop. But because of today's battle, he completely offended the Naga Siren royal family and the Principality of Rossard. The Naga Siren royal family was a little better. As long as the sea goddess did not fall, these Naga Siren royal family would at most secretly make some small moves. They would not dare to blatantly attack Soren. But the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon of the Principality of Rossard was hard to say. This woman was not only a legendary dragon disciple, but also mastered the resurrection spell, Life Hiding. The difficulty of killing her was almost the same as the difficulty of challenging a saint. The Naga Siren. Soren did not know much about them in his memory. He only remembered that they were a matriarchal society and there was once a god. But this god later became an evil creature. It seemed to be something called a banshee. In Soren's original memory, the Naga Siren did trigger some legendary level quests. But there was a powerful sea goddess above them, and all their actions ended in failure. In other words, they were an existence that could not make waves, so Soren did not pay much attention to them. At the same time, just as Soren was worried about the threat of the Naga Siren royal family and the future revenge of the Principality of Rossard, the Naga Siren priest in the sea temple was not having a good time. Because when she saw the incarnation of the sea goddess appear, she realized that she had done something wrong. She had always been afraid that Soren's power would be too strong, and eventually the sea temple would not be able to control him, and it would become a situation where they could not get rid of him. But the worry in her eyes was insignificant for the gods. The sea goddess did not care whether there was a pirate king outside the temple. She only cared about whether the pirate king was useful to her. If one were to look at it from this point of view, Soren played an important role in the battle. First of all, he killed the Swamp King who worshipped the demon Lord of the Abyss, Dagon. This was equivalent to clearing out the enemy's pawns in the sea and using the enemy's head to please the moody ocean goddess. After that, Soren opened up the outer islands. As the ocean goddess's blessing, Soren's actions of opening up the outer islands gathered a large number of people, which also meant that he was indirectly spreading her faith and accumulating a large number of believers. For example, many of the pirates believed in the goddess of the sea, but they were not fanatics. Then, Soren defeated Ashrod. This bloody massacre took place on the ocean. It could be understood as a sacrificial ritual for an evil god. The goddess of ocean was a god of the chaotic evil camp. Her joy and anger were unpredictable like the ocean. Therefore, she would not reject this kind of sacrificial ritual at all. On the contrary, she might even like it. From the beginning to the end. Although Soren was growing stronger, he also brought benefits to the goddess of the sea. In this way, the actions of the Naga Siren priest were a bit incompetent. The high gods would not feel that Soren was a threat. The one who felt that Soren was a threat was the Naga Siren priest. Therefore, all the actions of the Naga Siren priest to limit the development of Soren had become a reverse restriction on the expansion of the goddess of the sea's influence. If this was the case, the Naga Siren priest's current position was a bit dangerous. The goddess of the sea did not respond to her prayers. But at this time, she directly sent her avatar to help Soren through the crisis. This meant that Soren's position in her heart was higher than the Naga siren priest who was in charge of the sea temple. Gods were very realistic most of the time. The goddess of the sea did not care how ambitious Soren was or whether he wanted to be higher than the Naga siren priest. She only cared about whether Soren could expand her influence and spread her faith further. The outer islands were a breakthrough. If the outer islands became a breakthrough point of faith, she would have put a nail into the territory of the storm god. Soren was more useful than the Naga siren priest. Now, after seeing the avatar of the goddess of the sea appear today, the Naga siren priest gradually realized this in her heart. The goddess of the sea would not care whether Soren was stronger than the sea temple because Soren's power was very weak compared to the sea temple, and for the gods, it was difficult to think that a mortal would be too strong to be a threat. The worry of the Naga siren priest was not the concern of the goddess of the sea. On the contrary, her behavior during this time was very likely to cause the displeasure of the goddess of the sea. At the thought of this, the Naga siren priest felt cold all over. She had always been worried that Soren's strength was too strong, and in the end, the sea temple could not control and restrain him. But she did not think that Soren's strength would gradually increase his status in the eyes of the goddess of the sea. He might even be on the same level as her. This was like Soren's power struggle between the half-elf first mate and the red-haired female pirate Adele. He didn't care who wanted to suppress who. What he cared about was who could do what he told them to do. So the half-elf first mate was promoted, and the red-haired female pirate who failed the mission was deprived of some of her power. Because for Soren, no matter how the two fought, they could not threaten his rule. The same was true for the goddess of the sea. A quiet night. Soren stood on the tower and looked at the night sky. The stars in the sky had become dimmer, and many stars looked gray. This meant that some gods could no longer stabilize their divinity. It would not be long before the divine kingdoms represented by these gray stars would be stripped, and then the gods in charge of these kingdoms would fall to the mortal world one by one. The time of troubles was coming. The stars under the night sky were getting dimmer and dimmer. Many people had noticed this and realized the coming chaos. Brother. Vivian's footsteps came from behind. The little girl was wearing a white dress. It seemed that she had changed her clothes today. Soren turned around and smiled. The little girl walked to his side, raised her little white hand, and held one of Soren's fingers. Just like when they were young, she stood beside him and whispered, "What are you thinking about? Since leaving Amber City, you like to look at the sky more than before." Soren reached out and hugged her petite body, kissed her gently on the forehead, and said softly, "Nothing." He looked up at the moon. The power of the Lady of Silvermoon was also declining, and the night did not seem to be affected much. "Brother." Vivian leaned her little head on Soren's shoulder, and her little body sat on his arm. She whispered, "Vivian has grown up. I have become stronger than before. No matter what happens, I will be with you. Vivian can help you." "Really?" The little girl nodded seriously, and her expression was unprecedentedly serious. The moonlight was bright. Soren was smiling, holding the little Vivian tightly in his arms. He looked up at the moon and murmured in his heart, "Lady of Silvermoon, I don't know what fate will arrange. Can I avoid this battle with you?" New Moon Year 1677, September, late. The Witch of Fear, Lillian, died in the hands of the Lady of Silvermoon. There were only a few sons of fear left. The time of troubles officially began, and the saints of the gods tore the earth apart. It was now New Moon Year 1676, February, the middle of the year. In about 3 months, the first batch of gods with weak divine power would fall to the mortal world as saints, and demons would frequently appear all over the world. Soren had been walking fast enough, but he still felt that time was tight. From Amber City to the outer islands, although his strength had increased by leaps and bounds, the time of troubles was getting closer and closer. When the gods with great divine power also fell to the mortal world as saints, it meant that the unprecedented time of troubles had officially begun. He used to like the moon very much. But when he knew Vivian's identity, the moonlight that represented the Lady of Silvermoon was a thorn in his heart. What a good event for a pie in the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow the official account of Dread now. Chapter 362. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. The next day. The whole raging sand island was busy. Soren captured a large number of captives in this battle, and many pirates immediately surrendered when they saw that the situation was not right. In addition, the incarnation of the sea goddess appeared and eliminated the tsunami spell, so these pirates were even more in awe of Soren. However, because it was already late, Soren was worried that there would be trouble, so he could only lock them all up and block the warehouse of Raging Sand Island. Those were the materials that the pirate king Ashrod had transported. In addition to a large number of food and equipment, there was also kindler to reward his subordinates. It had to be said that Ashrod was indeed better than Soren when it came to accumulating wealth. This guy was in charge of the eastern route and had the support of the Naga royal family. At the same time, he also robbed Soren of the spoils of war from Devil Island. In the treasure house of Raging Sand Island, there were more than 200,000 kindler alone, and there were also a lot of pearls. There were special pearl divers in the east, and Ashrod probably collected hundreds and thousands of pearls in this way. Soren could not take this wealth for himself. Nearly half of it had to be used to reward his subordinates. After all, his subordinates had hundreds of casualties. In a naval battle, at most half of the people on a ship could survive if it was sunk. Occupying Raging Sand Island was just the beginning. The pirate king Ashrod had died in Soren's hands, so he naturally needed to take over the other party's territory. At the same time, because of occupying the eastern route, Soren's pirate leaders also had to be transferred. Managing the eastern route was a very time-consuming and laborious task. The pirate king Ashrod had been killed, but some of his leaders had survived, so it was inevitable that there would be resistance. Therefore, after some consideration, Soren decided to let the most capable half-elf first mate manage the eastern route. This guy was ruthless and decisive. In this period, he was the fastest candidate to stabilize the situation. As for the men assigned to him, the pirates under Scarface had suffered heavy casualties, and the one-eyed man was also a ruthless character. Both of them had to stay here to guard the eastern sea route. The men Soren left behind were all very murderous. The eastern sea route had just been taken over, and only a cruel rule could make others fear it. The fighting strength of these three guys was also top-notch. As for the others, Port Tylon, Shipwreck Bay, and Motor City could not be left aside. Soren had to promote another group of elite pirates to fill the vacant positions. Pirate King Ashrod had many spoils of war. However, Soren's loot might not even be comparable to the 3 pieces of equipment dropped by the Duke of Red Dragon's wife when she was killed. This was because she had dropped legendary equipment after her death. Item type, Wizard Ring, +1, item grade, Tier 1 Legendary, item description, this is a very special sorcerer's ring. It can only increase spell slots by 1 circle. Legend has it that it was personally made by a special sorcerer. The owner of this ring was a crazy sorcerer. In order to increase the number of level 1 spell slots he had spent a lot of time to create this special legendary Tier 1 item to memorize the Berserk Wizard's unique level 1 spell, Reckless Movement Curse. This item had fallen into the hands of many people, but in the end, only the Frenzied Wizard could exert its greatest power. Requirements, none. Effect, double the spell slots of 1 circle. This was the first legendary equipment dropped by the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. It was also a very famous legendary equipment. For the Berserk Sorcerer, this grade 1 legendary item was equivalent to an extremely powerful artifact. This was mainly because the Frenzied Wizard had a special Tier 1 spell called Frenzied Wizard. Frenzied Wizard, Tier 1 spell, a special spell that only the Frenzied Wizard can master. The power of chaos can cause unknown changes in magic. The Frenzied Wizard can try to use the Tier 1 spell, Frenzied Wizard, to replace any spells he can master, including the legendary spells he has mastered. However, the Frenzied Wizard must go through a difficult chaos test after casting the spell. If the chaos test is wrong, something unimaginable may happen. Note, you can use a chaos barrier to increase the success rate of the test. The Frenzied Wizard. A group of people who studied chaos magic and behaved like a lunatic. They were very few in number, and most of them died under their own spells. However, there were occasionally some terrifying frenzied wizards, especially after entering the realm of legends. They were a crazy existence that could single-handedly challenge a group of legendary wizards or turn over a plane in the abyss by themselves. Chaos had already seeped into their souls, and any spells cast by the frenzied wizard could be mutated. They could use their unique Tier 1 spell, Frenzied Wizard, to replace any spells. As long as they successfully passed the chaos test, they could cast as many spells as they wanted. In theory, if they were invincible, they were invincible. However, if they weren't lucky enough, the spell they cast could directly petrify them, turn them into frogs, or be struck by lightning or some other strange and unimaginable things. Soren had only seen a few frenzied wizards alive so far. This legendary equipment was their artifact. It could double the number of Tier 1 spells they could cast, and then use it to simulate any spells they had mastered. For now. Whether it was Soren or Vivian, they could not use it to its full potential, so it did not matter who held it. However, Vivian was a sorcerer, and her Tier 1 spell slots were calculated separately. If she wore this equipment, then Vivian's Tier 1 spell slots would increase by about 15. 15 Tier 1 spell slots. Even if it was used to memorize arcane missiles, the lethality would be quite amazing. So, unsurprisingly, this equipment was given to Vivian to wear. The second equipment was a bit more amazing. It was also a ring, but it was a famous ring. Because it could be said to be the closest to a divine artifact, or even better. Item type, Lich Ring, +5, item grade, Tier 5 legendary item, item description. This is a ring made by a legendary lich. It is engraved with an extremely complex magic formation. It can make the wearer immune to any poison, disease, and at the same time increase the wearer's resistance to charm spells and mind control spells. A special alchemy technique was used on this ring. It could strengthen the spellcaster's ability and increase their casting speed by 1 second when casting any spell. However, please note that this ring is shrouded in the power of the undead. There is a special curse on it that may reduce the wearer's vitality. Equipment requirements, Vitality 10 and above. Equipment special effect, Cursed item. After equipping, the wearer's vitality will be reduced by 2 points. The wearer cannot remove the ring after wearing it. Note, undead are immune to the effects of curses. Equipment effect 1, Poison immunity. This ring has a special power that allows the wearer to be immune to any poison attack. Whether it is an alchemy poison, a natural poison, or a poison attack caused by magic, the wearer will be completely immune to the damage caused by them, as well as other negative effects such as paralysis, rigidity, and so on. Equipment effect 2, Disease immunity. This ring has a special power that allows the wearer to be immune to any disease attack. Whether it is a disease caused by magic or a disease infected by the wearer, it will not have any effect on the wearer. Even the most terrible plague will not be able to threaten the wearer of this ring. Any disease spells will be ineffective on the wearer. Equipment effect 3, Increase the wearer's resistance to charm spells and mind control spells by 2 points. Equipment effect 4, Increase the casting speed by 1 point. Equipment effect 5, Additional level 6 spell slot, level 7 spell slot. Equipment effect 6, Greater haste, can be used once a day. Equipment effect 7, Increase the wearer's magic resistance by 10 points. Equipment effect 8, Increase the wearer's regenerative ability. Base HP recovery rate per hour +1. Equipment effect 9, Defense level +2. That's right. This was the legendary Lich Ring. The highest level Soren had seen before was only +2, so when he saw the +5 lich ring, he was almost stunned. The value of this ring was simply immeasurable. It was a legendary item that could not be measured by money. It could be said that any of Soren's spoils of war paled in comparison to this ring. To a certain extent, it was even more powerful than a divine artifact. However, it was also very dangerous to carry this equipment around. This was because the prophecy spell could locate the wearer's position. Many wizards, dragons, and special lifeforms like to use spells to track the wearer's position. It was fine if he wore it in the base, but if he took it out, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife would most likely track him down. This was because its magic aura was too strong. It was strong enough to allow others to cross planes to locate it. This was equivalent to a divine artifact. Its existence might even be very interesting to the gods who knew about it. Therefore, after Soren recognized this equipment, the first thing he did was to ask the fallen witch Kalina to seal its magic aura. The northern witch was proficient in prophecy spells and had many means to prevent others from tracking it down. Unless someone was bored enough to use a legendary prophecy spell to track it down, for the time being, no one could determine its position. As for the last equipment, compared to the +5 lich ring, it could simply be ignored. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. There's a prize for everyone. Follow Dread's official account now. Chapter 363. The god was missing. This was an extremely rare thing, but once it happened, it meant that there was a major change. Although the half-elf god was only a minor divine power god, he was also a true god after all. As long as he stayed in his own divine kingdom, even a powerful god would find it very difficult to kill him. Because the divine kingdom was an independent world, they were the lawmakers in the divine kingdom, and no god would easily leave his kingdom. But now there was a result that no one expected, that was, the half-elf god was not in his own divine kingdom. Gods rarely left their own kingdom. Even if they needed to appear in other worlds, they would at most send an avatar or use the body of a believer as a tool. Therefore, in the material plane, there were also saints in the half-elf church who could be the host of the gods. They had the ability to connect to the divine kingdom and could directly communicate with the half-elf god. But there was a problem. There was no trace of him in the divine kingdom of the half-elves. This weak god was not in his own divine kingdom. He was missing. None of the priests were able to contact this god, and none of their prayers were answered. Naturally, everyone had temporarily lost the ability to cast divine spells. This was a very serious matter. Although there were many droll in the half-elves' homeland with Autumn Fall as the center, the main force to protect the half-elves still came from the patron of the half-elves. His priests had been fighting against the orcs on the border of the wilderness, the ogres in the depths of the mountains, and the dwarves who were also not very friendly to the half-elves. The priests lost the ability to use magic, which was a devastating blow. So when they could not contact the god, the whole church began to operate frantically. This kind of thing had happened before. For example, the previous mistress of riches, after her disappearance, all the priests of riches were unable to cast divine spells. It was not until she returned that they were able to contact her. But at that time, the church had been weakened to the lowest point, and finally, the god was replaced by the successor. The disappearance of the god. It meant that he was likely to have fallen to other planes. This matter attracted the attention of many people, and even many legendary professions turned their eyes to the location of Autumn Fall. As the priests lost their magic, Autumn Fall urgently arranged a defensive line to prepare for the next possible attack. The fall of a god would inevitably cause an even more terrible chain of events. Whether good or evil, they would all be very interested in the followers he left behind. Right now, the most important thing for the half-elf church was to find traces of God's spirit. Because God's spirit's kingdom was still intact, he might not have fallen yet. Soren still had no idea what was going on in Autumn Fall. In fact, he was very busy right now because swallowing the Eastern Sea route required a lot of manpower, At the same time, he also needed to supply materials to the outer islands while expanding his territory. This caused his finances to start to feel a little pressure. Pirate King Ashrod had left behind a lot of wealth, but not much of it could be converted into kindler. Soren had close to 300 warships of various sizes under his command, and close to 5,000 pirates under his command. Their living expenses were not small at all. The Eastern Sea route was cut off, and a problem was placed in front of Soren. That was, no matter what hatred he had in the past, he must negotiate with the Eastern pirates. Otherwise, this route would be useless. His fleet could not go to the Eastern Kingdom, and the Eastern fleet could not enter the South Coast. Dang! Dang! There was a knock on the door. Come in. Soren put down the document in his hand and said in a deep voice. Soon, a middle-aged man who looked like a clerk came in. He bowed slightly and said, "Your Excellency. This is the news that was recently sent. Please take a look." Soren nodded gently and said, "Put it over there." Soon, the middle-aged man retreated. After reading the statistics of materials and spoils, Soren reached out and picked up the stack of intelligence documents. After a little glance, he focused on the information about Whiterun and Arendelle. The south coast was a trade area, and the speed of information flow was not slow. Whiterun was still the same as before. The appearance of the red dragon had affected the trade on land, and it was now somewhat withered. Many people avoided Whiterun, so the city's business tax was reduced by more than 50%. Now that it was urgent to banish or kill the red dragon, the Parliament of Nobles also stood on the same side, hoping to attract powerful adventurers with a high reward. It would be best if it was a legendary level team so that they could deal with the red dragon. Unfortunately, none of the adventurers who went there returned. What a joke. That was an ancient red dragon. Soren couldn't even last one round against it. Even a team of legendary professions would be useless, because its strength was comparable to that of many gods. Whiterun is done for. Soren muttered to himself, put down the document, and whispered, "No one can kill the ancient red dragon at present. Before the Avatar crisis begins, that place will be its territory. But this is good. With the interruption of land trade, maritime trade will become even more important." The second was information about Arendelle. After seeing the information above, Soren couldn't help but frown and murmured, "Princess Royal is missing? She hasn't shown up for a long time. Princess Anna is now in charge of Arendelle? This is not good." Scenes of the past appeared in front of his eyes. Soren stretched out his hand and stroked the legendary curved sword, icing death, and slowly said, "Arendelle's prosperity is entirely supported by the strength of Princess Royal alone. Now that she's suddenly disappeared for a long time, I'm afraid the situation of Arendelle is a little worrying. I don't know if she can handle it alone." Princess Royal's strength was unfathomable. But without the powerful Princess Royal, Arendelle's strength and wealth were not matched. She was not strong enough, but she had too much wealth. This was definitely a disaster. Now that Soren was far away on the south coast, he could not help much. He could only hope that Princess Royal would appear as soon as possible. After all, he always felt a little guilty for Princess Anna. He picked up a pen and wrote a paragraph on the information, asking others to pay more attention to Arendelle's situation. His intuition told him, if Princess Royal was really missing, Arendelle would be in chaos. The Battle of Raging Sand Island. Soren's harvest was still very rich. First of all, he got a lot of slaughter EXP, most of which came from himself, and a small part was provided by the mutant killer whale. Soren was also very surprised that the divine gift had such a function. Although the slaughter EXP he got was less than 10,000 points, it was an additional source. At present, he had accumulated 160,000 slaughter EXP, which was enough to upgrade the wizard profession level, but not enough to upgrade the shadow dancer level. It was a pity that he could not kill the Duke of Red Dragon's wife personally. The real bulk of slaughter EXP was on her. Killing her was conservatively estimated to give more than 100,000 slaughter EXP. As for the Pirate King Ashrod, this guy only got less than 40,000 points. He was completely useless. No wonder he did not dare to fight the Swamp King. This guy's strength was no match for the Swamp King. The biggest gain in this battle was the legend point. After Soren defeated the Pirate King Ashrod, he got the highest legend point in history. Battle of Raging Sand Island, legendary battle. In the middle of February 1676 of the New Moon era, you had a decisive battle between the Pirate Kings on Raging Sand Island. In the battle, you killed the Pirate King Ashrod and defeated the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Your fame has spread throughout the world seas. Most pirates have heard of your name. At present, you have become the most powerful pirate king on the south coast. At the same time, because of the appearance of the tsunami and the incarnation of the sea goddess, people from other forces have gradually increased their attention to you. The appearance of the incarnation of the sea goddess means that your existence has attracted the attention of some gods. Therefore, some existences in the legendary realm may pay more attention to you. Legend point plus 8 legend points. Soren had never gotten such a high legend point. Especially the mention of the gods' attention, it seemed to have a different kind of chill, which made Soren feel a burst of pressure. Entering the legendary realm. He was already qualified to be noticed by many gods, because the legendary realm was above the mortals. Being noticed by the gods in advance, he did not know whether it was good or bad, but he still had to go on. Soren had a clearer plan for the next step of his plan. Elemental stone, earth. Soren played with this legendary equipment that he first got, and his face showed a thoughtful expression. All the way until now. The role of this legendary equipment had been reduced a lot because there were fewer enemies who could force Soren to activate the stone skin. At the same time, summoning the earth elemental was not very useful in the sea. But it was not completely useless. Because this legendary equipment was only a part of a certain item. This was a legendary difficulty chain quest, and the final loot was a shard of divinity. Elemental stone, earth, elemental stone, water, elemental stone, fire, elemental stone, air. 4 pieces of equipment combined into one. It was a grade 3 legendary item that could summon giant earth elementals, giant water elementals, giant fire elementals, and giant wind elementals at the same time. The giant elementals were second only to the legendary elemental elders. With Soren's current ability, he was qualified to try this challenge. Moreover, there was one equipment that Soren might need to go to the desert ruins to get, and that was the rogue's artifact, Cloak of Proof Against Detection. A legendary equipment that was immune to any detection spells. Chapter 364. Late February. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed. Soren was busy preparing when he finally received a response from the Eastern Pirates. The other party wanted to sit down and talk with him. There were no eternal enemies in this world, only eternal interests. Soren was not the only one who lost when the Eastern Sea route was blocked. They also could not transport expensive goods from the east to the south coast in exchange for benefits. Compared to the fertile southern areas, the eastern desert covered a large area. Because of the energy left over from the Arcane Empire, the area of the eastern desert could reach up to 2/3 of its original size. Such a large desert area greatly limited the output of the eastern world. Trade was the most important source of income for the eastern pirates. The next morning, in the sea east of Raging Sand Island, Soren saw the fleet from the east. It was hard to believe that the largest force among the eastern pirates was actually a group of pirates controlled by a group of monks. Monks who followed the evil order. They could be seen among the desert bandits and eastern pirates. They were a very difficult enemy to deal with. This time, the one who was sent to negotiate with Soren was a monk, and it was a legendary monk. Because just as the dragon-headed warship approached, several figures flew out from the opposite eastern pirate ship. These eastern monks in martial attire directly landed on the sea, then stepped on the sea at high speed and finally landed on the deck of the dragon-headed warship. Treading wave steps. The special skill of the eastern monks belonged to a kind of secret skill that was similar to a secret skill. These monks had obvious Asian characteristics. It was not easy to describe them, but they looked 70 to 80% similar to the Indians. Soren stood on the deck with cold eyes. When the Eastern monk in front of him was looking at him, Soren was also observing the other party. This was a young legendary monk. At least in terms of appearance, he was not very old. His appearance was not much different from the Eastern people in Soren's memory. Although his skin was more Asian, his forehead, nose, and eyes had obvious Western characteristics. The other party's eyes were quite sharp, and there were thick calluses on his palms. The monks were proficient in hand-to-hand combat. It was not an exaggeration to say that their palms were like steel and iron. The most eye-catching thing about him was his skin, which had a faint golden hue to it. It was as if his yellow skin had reached a certain level and turned golden. Divine transcendence. It was a special ability unique to legendary monks. However, Soren still preferred to call it the diamond unbreakable body. This was because once a monk reached the legendary realm, they would be immune to diseases and poisons. At the same time, they would never age and would only die when their lifespan was up. Ordinary weapons couldn't hurt them, and they also had an amazing resistance to magic. Legendary monks were one of the most difficult enemies to deal with. Sir. The legendary monk stared at Soren as if he couldn't believe that Soren was the legendary beheader. In terms of appearance, Soren was too young. In terms of strength, Soren didn't seem to have reached the realm of legends, at least for now. This was because a legendary profession's soul would have a kind of sublimation. As a legendary monk with high perception, he could feel this. However, Soren's reputation was accumulated by the number of people he killed. Although the monk had doubts, he didn't show the slightest disrespect. Please. Soren stretched out his hand and made an inviting gesture. At the same time, he glanced at the three monks behind him. All of them were advanced professions. The Eastern pirates were still so strong. When he traveled to the Eastern world, he saw many legendary professions. Maybe it was because of the energy mutation during the Arcane Empire, or maybe it was because the environment was too bad. Evil creatures, evil gods, and abominations often appeared in the Eastern world. There was a monk monastery that even Soren didn't dare to break into when he was at his peak. It was built directly on top of the nest of an ancient evil creature. Note, the name seems to be called Magic Sunflower, a terrible evil creature that ended an era. One of the teachings of the martial monks was to guard these ancient evil creatures. This was the same regardless of whether the monks were good, neutral, or evil. The monks of the three factions came from many different monasteries, but the essence of order still existed. Their mission was to prevent the chaotic and evil life forms from causing more damage. Even among the adventurers who were mainly active in the Eastern world, there were people who claimed that they had seen a legendary monk with a professional level of 40. Soren didn't believe this. Because a professional level 40 monk's combat power was almost off the charts. Whether it was physical attacks or magic attacks, it was almost impossible to threaten him. Soren estimated that the most powerful monk in the Eastern world was only around professional level 30. Note, there was a legend that the massacre god's son who created Lunar Style and Sunfire Style was professional level 40. This was his limit. Raging Sand Island. Soren was in the hall talking with the legendary monk from the east. However, no matter how fierce the fight was, they still had to sit down and negotiate in the end. Because the east coast and the south coast were very far away, it was impossible for them to fight to the death. There seemed to be sounds of argument coming from inside. However, Vivian didn't care about these things at all. She was more interested in the three bald monks outside because she had met one of them before and he had given her a small gift. Hey! The little girl was wearing a black princess dress. She tilted her head and looked at the monks outside the door and said, "I've seen people like you before. But he seems to be much stronger than you." The monks outside the door didn't say anything and just looked at the little girl with surprise. Boring. Vivian pursed her lips as she looked at them. All of a sudden, she rolled her big eyes and said in a crisp voice, "I heard that you guys have some very powerful combat skills. Do you dare to spar with my followers?" The three monks looked at each other, and one of them seemed to be eager to try. But when Vivian pulled out the candidate to compete with them, the monk's face immediately showed disappointment. He even looked a little bit dumbfounded. That's right. The candidate Vivian pulled out was Lulu Meow. Lulu Meow was wearing a pink dress today with a lot of sweet candies hidden in her pockets. As Vivian's little follower, she basically followed behind her all day. She was like her little tail. At this moment, Lulu Meow, who had just eaten a candy, was caught in front with a blank face and looked around doubtfully. Don't underestimate her. Vivian snorted and curled her lips. You might not even be able to beat her. Lulu Meow. Fight with the bald guy in the front. If you win, I'll give you a holiday and buy you whatever you want to eat. Meow. When the feline girl heard that she could eat whatever she wanted, her eyes instantly lit up. Almost without thinking, she bent her body and turned into an afterimage as she pounced forward. Then, her sharp claws drew a cold light. Bang! Bang! In an instant, they exchanged 3 moves. Lulumo's petite figure flew out directly and then fell to the ground with a plop. She meowed with some grievance and looked at her dirty dress. Her eyes immediately showed a fierce light. She was angry. At the same time, the monk who had just fought with her looked at his chest with a stunned face. On his arm, chest, and abdomen, there were 3 faint bloodstains. The enemy's attack was not enough to threaten his life, but the speed was so fast that it made him speechless. As a monk with strong perception, he couldn't keep up with the rhythm of the opponent's attack. In the end, although he shook off the cat girl who rushed over, he was also scratched in the chest. What kind of monster is this? The face of the high-grade monk became serious. He put his hands together and made a tiger posture. At the same time, his eyes were locked on the petite cat girl in front of him. Even the high-grade monk with the wind attack ability couldn't keep up with her attack speed. The cat girl in front of him indeed had the strength to challenge him. Vivian still had a playful expression on her face. It seemed that she was full of confidence for the next battle. It seemed that victory was in her hands. Chapter 365. Bang bang bang. What happened in front of them made the 3 monks feel incredible. Because among all the professions, no one could attack faster than a monk. More importantly, the monk's ultimate skill relied on continuous blows to destroy the opponent. But now the scene in front of them completely subverted their previous understanding. Because in front of them, a cat girl who looked like a little girl, attacked faster than a high-grade monk. The dazzling attack was so fast that it challenged the retina's capture limit, especially the opponent's high agility and reaction ability. She could go up the 90-degree vertical wall by rubbing her hands and feet twice, and she could run directly against the wall. Even a martial monk had to master a unique lightness technique. What was this little cat girl's background? She was just another little girl's follower, so how strong was this little girl who looked very cute in a black princess dress? Bang bang bang. Lulu was once again shaken out. That's right. Although her attack speed was extremely fast, her weakness was also very obvious, that was, she did not have enough strength. As an agility beast, Lulu had very high natural agility, but her strength was probably less than 8 or 9 points. Even when she grew up, it would only be 12 or 13 points. Lack of strength naturally meant lack of lethality. It was difficult for her to fight with the high-grade monk in front of her. Even if she attacked the other party, she could only scratch the skin of the other party. With such an injury, even if she attacked dozens of times, it would be difficult to make the other party lose his fighting power. Roundhouse kick. Being forced into a corner by the little cat girl in front of him, the high-grade monk finally felt a little embarrassed. He suddenly shouted, and his legs kicked out, setting off a gust of wind. The fierce whip kick directly blocked all the attack routes. No matter where Lulu attacked from, she had to take it. Meow. The little cat girl was very clever. Her natural fighting instinct made her aware of the danger, and she actually opened up a distance. Chain steps. Shock palm. As soon as the attack was interrupted by the brute force of the high-grade monk, a loophole immediately appeared. The monk in front of her shouted loudly. His figure suddenly sped up and dashed forward. He waved his palm, and the ferocious palm attack was mixed with a hidden force. If it hit the feline girl, her life might be in danger. At this moment, Vivian, who was watching the battle from the side, finally had a change in expression. Her small face revealed a rare look of nervousness and worry. Shadow leap. Just as the monk's palm of deterrence was about to hit her, Soren's figure suddenly appeared behind Lulu's back. His eyes were cold as he picked up Lulu and put her behind him. With a cold snort, he swung his fist and blocked the attack in front of him head-on. Bang! Soren's figure stood motionless in the same place, only slightly stiff for a moment. The high-grade monk took 3 steps back in a row and looked at Soren in disbelief. The other party was directly immune to the hidden force of the palm of deterrence. The other party's tenacity was so high that he was not like a rogue, but more like a legendary warrior. His attack just now was like a cow sinking into the sea. The legendary pirate king in front of him definitely had a physique far beyond that of ordinary people. This was very difficult for rogues because the direction of their training was more about their skills, not their own constitution. Stop. Soren snorted coldly, looked at Vivian with a slightly reproachful look, and whispered, "Nonsense. You two go back. From today on, you're not allowed to go out. I'm going to put you in confinement for 2 days." The movement outside finally alarmed the people inside. Soren just went out and saw the scene in front of him. Vivian Lawless didn't know the depth of the high-grade monk, but Soren knew that some of their unique fighting skills were quite dangerous. That was why he had just appeared to take the attack. If he hadn't appeared to take the attack, Lulu would have been seriously injured and unconscious. A 7 or 8-year-old cat girl, no matter how talented she was, without the support of a profession, it was impossible for her to be the opponent of a high-grade monk. Clap, clap, clap. There was a burst of applause. The legendary monk's figure also came out. His expression seemed a little dignified, and he suddenly said, "Your Excellency really deserves to be called the legendary beheader. Your strength is really impressive. That move just now." As a legendary profession, he could see a lot of things. First of all, Soren's tenacity was extremely high, almost comparable to a legendary warrior, and he was directly immune to the hidden force of the palm of deterrence. Then there was Sauron's strength. He could take a normal punch head-on and force his subordinates back. His strength was not inferior to a purebred warrior. "You flatter me." Soren turned around and stared at Vivian. The little girl seemed a little scared. She grabbed Lulu and whispered, "I just want to use them to train Lulu. Besides, she still has a unique skill that she hasn't used yet." Soren frowned and said in a deep voice, "Go back to your room. I'll deal with you later." At this time, the legendary monk in front of him suddenly seemed to have made a decision and said, "Your Excellency. Since we are arguing about the distribution of the Eastern Sea route, how about this? I'll compare notes with you. If you win, everything will be according to your requirements. If I win, then we will have the right to free trade on the south coast. Compare notes?" Soren was stunned for a moment, then he looked at the monk and said in a deep voice, "Okay." Sure enough, he didn't come with good intentions. This guy probably wanted to test his strength. In this case, he couldn't back down. "Please." There was a hint of belligerence in the eyes of the legendary monk. He raised his hand and made a gesture of invitation. Then his palms glowed with a faint golden color. Combat energy strike. After the monk's profession level reached level 10, the palms would be made into +1 rare weapons. When the profession level reached level 13, the palms would be regarded as +2 rare weapons. After every 3 profession levels, the monk's unarmed attack ability would be strengthened. The legendary monk's hands were equivalent to +4 rare weapons, and could reach up to +5. Some Eastern secret methods could train their hands into a metal-like structure. At that time, the monk's palms would be as strong as diamond. Combat energy strike was what adventurers called it. The original name of this ability was Kill Strike, a deadly attack ability. Shang. The legendary curved sword Icing Death appeared in Soren's palm. This level of competition didn't allow for any carelessness. Sometimes, it couldn't even be done. Traceless steps. Facing the legendary pirate King Soren, the legendary monk didn't have the slightest carelessness. He started with a fierce attack and wanted to use the monk's wind attack to suppress the opponent. Penetrating shock palm. The legendary monk, who was proficient in unarmed attacks, approached at high speed and raised his hand to slap Soren's chest. Clang. The slightly golden palm hit the curved sword, and a force passed through the blade to Soren's body. He couldn't help but tremble as if he had been punched in the chest. This was a combat skill to deal with a warrior wearing full plate armor, but the monk actually used it to deal with a rogue. He was really careful. Sword form, spinning strike. The curved sword in Soren's hand drew a cold light and directly slashed toward the monk's waist. The legendary monk avoided the attack with an iron bridge, and at the same time, his legs swept toward Soren's crotch. Sweeping kick. Chain strike. Whirlwind kick. The legendary monk was proficient in continuous attacks, and the speed of the wind attack was simply dazzling. Sword form, beheading. In the face of the enemy's ferocious continuous attacks, Soren didn't panic at all. He was very clear about the monk's fighting style, which was to never show weakness. Once he retreated, he would be beaten until he couldn't fight back. He suddenly burst out and swung his sword toward the monk's head. As long as the monk kicked Soren's body, he would be exposed to the light of his sword. Moving step. Cloud ladder. In the face of Soren's counterattack, the legendary monk's expression became more and more serious. Although the enemy didn't use many abilities from beginning to end, it was these simplest moves that reflected the opponent's true strength. Incomparably powerful attributes, extremely high conditioned reflexes, astonishing dodging techniques, and an almost inhuman immunity. The penetrating shock palm, which could directly stun a warrior wearing plate armor, hit the monk's body like sinking into the sea. The figure of the legendary monk rose from the ground and rose to a height of 20 meters as if he was enchanted. His expression was quite serious, and he fell from the sky like a cannonball. At the same time, his palms slammed together, and a scorching breath emerged. Sun flame form. A group of flames visible to the naked eye exploded, and the scorching heat waves raged out. When the legendary monk waved his hand, a strong force also broke out, and directly shook Soren's figure upside down. Cough. Soren retreated 7 or 8 meters in a row, and suddenly rolled to stabilize his body. At the same time, he reached out and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and murmured, "I didn't expect to see this move again after so many years." Sun flame form. In the past, many people jokingly called it, Nine Suns Divine Art, which showed how powerful it was. Sun flame form, lunar shadow form, traceless steps. The 3 ultimate moves of the legendary monk, who didn't know how many people died because of these moves. Evade sight. Shadow leap. Soren's eyes became cold, and his figure escaped into the shadows as if he had completely disappeared. He was serious. Because it was difficult for him to defeat a legendary monk in a head-on battle. P.S. Today's first update, there is one more update. Chapter 366. Whirlwind kick. In the face of Soren's disappearance, the legendary monk's reaction was extremely fast. He stomped his foot and inserted it into the soil. Then a whirlwind kicked up a large area of soil, and then his legs kicked up a gust of wind. The wind blew the soil away in all directions, covering a range of more than 10 meters in front of him. As expected of a legendary profession with rich combat experience. If Soren stayed in the same place after entering the shadow, the raised dust would expose his trace. However, Soren was not an ordinary rogue. He could be said to have used all his strength against the legendary monk. After his figure entered the shadow, he instantly launched shadow jump and left his original position. Ha! The legendary monk retracted his leg and bounced back, not daring to stay in the same place. The raised dust did not find any trace of Soren. This legendary rogue had already lurked near him. Unless the other party moved first, even he could not determine the specific location of the enemy. The legendary monk put on a defensive posture. At the same time, he moved around a circle at high speed to avoid Soren finding his weakness. In fact, without the buff spell in advance, Soren's situation was slightly disadvantageous. Fortunately, the monks were all professions with high perception. In terms of attributes, Soren was likely to have a high advantage. The legendary monk had a strong instinct to dodge. Conventional sneak attacks were easy to be detected by them. To deal with this kind of enemy, one must use a wave of offensive to gain an absolute advantage. Shadow jump. Shadow strike. Sword form, waist cut. Soren's figure strangely appeared behind the legendary monk, and at the same time, he swung his sword toward the monk's waist. However, the legendary monk seemed to have expected his attack. He roared in an instant, and at the moment before Soren launched his attack, he instantly twisted his body and kicked toward him. Extraordinary perception. Monks had the highest perception to dodge, and their perception of threats was quite amazing. Tiger out. Shadowless kick. Suddenly, the legendary monk's legs turned into a blur and swept towards Soren's head at an astonishing speed, almost sealing off all of his escape routes. Evade sight. Shadow leap. Soren's figure disappeared once again, but this time, he didn't put too much distance between them. Summon shadow. A distorted shadow suddenly emerged from the legendary monk's shadow. It directly rushed over and entangled the enemy in front of it. Although the distorted shadow couldn't threaten the legendary monk with the divine body, it could hinder his movement. Shadow leap. Soren's shadow step and shadow realm was an important skill that allowed him to use shadow step and shadow realm. Once again, he appeared behind the legendary monk. Vampiric touch. Shadow strike. Sword form, beheading. Soren's figure appeared out of thin air, and at the moment of contact with the enemy, he activated vampiric touch. At the same time, a cold light appeared on his curved sword, and he instantly slashed the head of the enemy in front of him. Clang! The sound of metal colliding was heard. The legendary monk's palms turned golden in an instant. He actually used both hands to block Soren's attack, making a sound like metal colliding. A trace of blood dripped down. The sharpness of the curved sword was far beyond his expectations. With a click, half of the palm fell to the ground. Your Excellency is indeed extraordinary. The legendary monk immediately made a decision and jumped back. In an instant, he was more than 10 meters away. His voice trembled slightly because of the pain. He bowed slightly and said, "I admit defeat. From today on, the profit distribution of the eastern route will be according to Your Excellency's request." 3 high-level martial monks guarded him on his left and right. All of them were in a fighting posture. In fact, when half of the legendary monk's palm was cut off by Soren, they had already approached quickly. Who? Soren stood in place and looked at the opponent. There was still some killing intent in his eyes. He looked at the opponent silently for a while, then took back his curved sword and said in a deep voice, "Very good." Monks rarely used equipment. This was their biggest weakness. Even the legendary monk could not withstand the sharpness of icing death. As long as he had no chance to dodge, Soren's chances of winning would increase. The legendary monk covered the wound on his broken hand. His expression did not show much emotion. He just bowed and said, "Then everything is settled. I will convey Your Excellency's request to the monastery. Goodbye." After that, the legendary monk did not look at the half of the palm cut off on the ground. He turned and left with the others. It was not until he walked out of the courtyard that he breathed a sigh of relief. At this distance, there were not many people who could stop him. It was not until this moment that he realized that his back was oozing cold sweat. If he had not immediately admitted defeat and retreated, he would have been cut down by Soren because the opponent obviously still had a trump card. The legendary rogue's shadow crossing ability was more than that. He did not even force the opponent to use his legendary ability. In fact, Soren had not yet mastered the fighting skills of a legendary rogue. He had already used up shadow jump, and shadow summoning, but the legendary monk did not know that at this moment. He thought that Soren still had some strength left. Such an enemy was really terrible. The legendary monk secretly made up his mind. When he went back, he would tell the monastery about his danger and try not to conflict with the rising pirate king. Brother. Vivian, who had been standing next to him, came over with a murderous look in her beautiful big eyes. She said in a crisp voice, "Why didn't you kill him just now? He injured you just now." Soren stared at her and said in a deep voice, "Nonsense. Do you know how strong the monastery behind him is? It's an organization that has guarded the ancient evil for thousands of years. Even the Church of the Gods has no advantage against them. The mission of the monks was to guard the evil. As professionals in the lawful camp, they had a lot of strict doctrines. This group of people may not be kind, but they had always been maintaining the order of the world." Soren had no intention of going to war with them at all. There were also rogues in the Eastern world. Once a full-scale war started, Soren might not be able to win against those monks and rogues. "Go back." Soren glanced at Lulu, who had a small mouth next to him, and said in a deep voice, "Don't mess around like this in the future. Lulu is still a child, and you let her fight with a high-grade monk. What if something happens? Tomorrow, Dark Blade will teach her fighting skills. You go back to the outer islands this afternoon. Gloria is setting up a portal to the shadow plane. Go back and help her set up a teleportation barrier." When the little girl heard this, she suddenly felt a little wronged and pulled Lulu away. He clearly won the fight, okay? This stupid Lulu didn't know to use a big move at the beginning. Otherwise, the high-grade monk might not have had a chance to attack. Note, Drizzt part-time job was Marikai, forest goddess, Ronin. This was also an advanced profession from the Eastern world. Most of them were advanced by rangers or rogues. Chapter 367. In the blink of an eye, it was already March. There was only a year and a half left before the start of the Avatar crisis, and there were only about 20 months left before the fall of the goddess of magic. Soren always felt that something was chasing him from behind. Even though he had walked fast enough, he still felt that there was not enough time. Especially after the news of the demigod vampire defeating the Fear Church came back, Soren's sense of crisis became stronger. According to the original historical track, it should be the awakening of the Witch of Fear, Lillian, and then she controlled the Fear Church and eventually set off a tragic massacre. But now the Fear Church's control had become the demigod vampire, and a massacre seemed to be coming. Vivian was sent back to the outer islands. Soren could not take the risk of further awakening her fear divinity, because as the boundary of the plane became more and more loose, the higher demons could break through the plane barrier and come to the material plane in at most half a year. The devils had already appeared, and they bewitched the mortals to provoke wars. The arrival of the higher demons was only a matter of time. During this time, the number of demon followers appearing in the material plane had become more and more frequent, and some evil organizations were carrying out taboo sacrificial rituals. Relatively speaking, the South Coast, which had just experienced a war, was quite calm. The news from all sides was not very good. The orcs had shown signs of moving south, the half-blood orcs launched a raid, and the internal friction of the human principalities increased. Even the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, who had just fought with Soren, was involved in the war to suppress the rebellion. It seemed that since March, the conflicts that had accumulated over the past 6 months broke out, and at least 7 places on the whole continent broke out in wars. There was also news from Autumn-Fall. Soren heard that the half-elf god had disappeared, and the priests who believed in him could no longer obtain divine spells. He did not remember where the god fell to, but he remembered that he finally died in the Underdark. With the fall of this weak god, the attitude of the world towards the gods gradually changed. Everything was normal on the eastern route. The mission of the monks' monastery was to suppress those ancient evils. At least before the destruction of the demon army, many powerful monks lived in seclusion all over the world. This was their tradition. Just like the fist master Soren had met, he should also be cultivating somewhere. The Eastern Sea route was used to provide for the monastery's consumption. Cultivating monks also required a large amount of resources, and many secret techniques required expensive medicinal herbs to practice. Soren knew his limits. This was because he was a member of the Order faction. Coincidentally, the monk was also a member of the Order faction. Both of them valued order and rules. The person in charge of the East Coast was the half-elf first mate. He was a ruthless and decisive person. With him in control of the Eastern Sea route, nothing would happen in the short term. Therefore, after entering March, Soren prepared to return to the outer islands. He had to prepare for the next step. Establishing a foundation in the outer islands was for the next step, and the next step would be to fight against the divine saints. Even if Soren did not clash with the other gods, the battle between him and the Dread Lord was inevitable. He was dead. However, he wasn't completely dead yet. What Soren needed to do was to completely destroy the Dread Lord so that he could no longer threaten Vivian's safety. There were a total of 4 elemental stones. The Earth Elemental Stone was near the Elven Kingdom, the Water Elemental Stone was in the Frost Kingdom, and the Fire Elemental Stone was in the desert. Soren was very clear about the approximate location of these 3 places, but he only knew that the last Gas Elemental Stone was in a very dangerous area. This was a legendary level chain quest. Soren obtained the Earth Elemental Stone by luck. He still remembered the huge rock giant that rushed out from under the elemental altar when they finally left. That was the real guardian. After the 4 elemental stones were combined, the level would be further improved, and finally, there would be a summoning spell close to the legendary level. Elemental Legion. In the past, this quest was completed by piling up human heads. A total of 3 groups of high-grade professions died. With Soren's current strength, he should be able to try to complete it alone. After all, his equipment was far beyond the standard at that time. The first destination was the Frost Kingdom. The situation in Arendelle seemed to be a bit bad, so Soren planned to go and take a look. He was a person who valued promises very much. The altar of the Water Elemental Stone was only about 100 kilometers away from Arendelle. There were many active ice trolls nearby. He was going to cross the north to get there, and he would pass by Arendelle on the way. Then the next stop was the Desert of Death. His first goal was to get the Fire Elemental Stone, and then find a way to get the Rogue's artifact, Cloak Against Detection. This was the core equipment to fight against the Saints. As for the last Elemental Stone, he might need Gloria and others to go together because that place was a bit dangerous. Soren might fail miserably if he dealt with it alone. The 4 elemental stones could unlock a seal, and the reward was a shard of divinity. If it also had divinity, then the final function was to transform someone into a demigod. Whether it was Vivian or Soren now, they could use this shard of divinity to advance into a demigod. Therefore, Soren was determined to get this shard of divinity. After all, this was one of the few ways he knew to get a shard of divinity without killing a god. To be honest, even if he joined forces with everyone now, he was not confident to fight against a weak divine spirit saint. Because the demigod and above were immune to the legendary spell, Time Stop. Without Vivian's ultimate skill, Time Stop, the success rate of fighting against a divine spirit saint began to plummet. This was the same even if they had the spell, Melf's Minute Meteor. After all, this spell could only help them break through the protection of the divine spirit's law, but could not directly kill the divine spirit saints. Returning to the outer islands again was very different. The size of Port Mordor had doubled, and there were 2 more unfinished magnificent buildings next to it. They were the Sea Temple and the Wealth Temple. The 2 churches seemed to be secretly competing with each other. The materials used to build the temples were extremely expensive, and many of them had to be transported from other places across the sea. People were sometimes so realistic. The more majestic the temple was, the more likely it was to attract believers. According to this progress, it was impossible to build a temple in a year or 2. The merchant ships from the City of Wealth had approached, and the trade of the outer islands had attracted many people. Especially now that the war on land was getting more and more serious, the outer islands would help expand the influence of the goddess of wealth in the field of trade. The city of Mordor was still the same. It was just that the scale was larger. At the same time, green sprouts emerged from the cultivated land in the south. Spring wheat had been planted. Even if it was not a bumper harvest this year, it could ensure self-sufficiency. Soren had a lot of things to do in a short time, but no matter how many things he had to do it step by step. In the afternoon, groups of slaves were gathered, and the city of Mordor now had nearly 2,000 or 3,000 slaves. Soren stood on the high platform and looked down at the slaves below, then nodded to the red-haired female pirate next to him, and then nearly 30 slaves were brought out. "I'm a person who values promises." Soren looked down at the slaves in front of him and also looked at the others. His eyes swept over the drow warrior next to him. He could feel that the other party was avoiding his sight because he was very dissatisfied with the behavior of the drow some time ago. Pada. Soren walked in front of these slaves. In front of them were two slave brothers who looked a bit like each other. They were the people saved by Vivian. Those who work hard should be rewarded. "I'm not a stingy master." Soren looked at these slaves. Their expressions were a little panicked. Only the two brothers at the front were surprised because Vivian had promised that some of them would be rewarded. "As your master." Soren looked down at the more than 30 slaves and said in a deep voice, "I give you freedom. From today on, you will get the identity of the residents of Mordor and have your own house, property, and family. Come on." Untie their shackles. There was a cry of surprise. The slaves present could not help but raise their heads with an incredulous expression on their faces. They were free? How was this possible? But the next scene made them realize that this was not a joke, because the city guards next to them untied the shackles of more than 30 slaves, and then threw a piece of rough linen clothes to them. Except for the two brothers standing in front, the other slaves were still surprised because they did not expect Soren to give them freedom. These people who were given freedom were all docile slaves. Most of them were from the mainland, and only 3 of them were indigenous slaves. The so-called freedom naturally did not mean that they could come and go. They were just given the identity of the residents of Mordor, and then had the right to house, property, and form a family. These people still had to work for Soren. It was just that they did not have to squeeze in stinky cages, and they did not have to be whipped by the guards. They could earn their own private wealth, and at the same time, live a life far better than other slaves. Freedom? Relative freedom was also freedom. Soren had given them the greatest gift, so they did not need to think too much. Take them down. Soren turned and glanced at the red-haired female pirate, and said in a deep voice, "There is a house for them in the north. From tomorrow onwards, they will not have to work with other slaves. Those with special skills will be assigned to other places, and those without special skills will be arranged to work at the port. These 2 people are very talented in farming, so let them be in charge of farming." Slaves. Population. There was still a difference between the two. Soren's next step was to turn the slaves of Mordor into a population. Of course, they must be docile slaves. Those natives who were difficult to discipline would naturally be dealt with by the drows. Chapter 368. After such a long time, Gloria finally stabilized the teleportation circle that connected to the shadow plane. She opened a barrier that allowed people to come and go freely, and at the same time, closed the portal at any time. The teleportation circle was full of magic traps, and even legendary professions could not sneak in quietly. Exploring the shadow plane was a very time-consuming thing because neither Soren nor Gloria could take down the wizard tower. Even if they joined forces, they might not be able to defeat the guards on the first floor of the wizard tower. 3 diamond golems, a magic construct, and a powerful thaling that was responsible for operating the wizard tower. Soren had one last preparation before he left. That was the level 5 spell, teleportation. Gloria had set up a transmission mark in Mordor City. As long as Soren learned the level 5 spell, he could come back from thousands of miles away. This was the biggest advantage of being a wizard. Unfortunately, it was difficult to master teleportation, and Soren might even need to take him on the road to learn it. There was no other way. There were too many spells that a wizard needed to learn, and the difficulty was not low. With his talent, he was already fast enough. With the completion of the teleportation circle, Soren finally came to the shadow plane again. But this time there were more people, not only Soren, Vivian, and Gloria, but also fallen witch Corinne. Corinne had done a lot of research on the Arcane Empire, and she was even more proficient in some aspects than Gloria. Gloria had been here before, but she didn't get close. However, it was the first time for Fallen Witch, so when she saw the wizard tower in front of her and the huge magic lock, she couldn't help but be shocked. What a powerful magic lock. I'm afraid it's stronger than the magic lock in the north. It's just that its power has declined, and many parts have not been opened. Soren didn't say anything. In this regard, the two orthodox witches had more right to speak. You're really a variable in fate. Fallen Witch's eyes brightened as if there was a glimmer of hope. She murmured, maybe there's what I'm looking for here. If I don't have to go to the Nirvana mechanical mirror, then I can. She paused for a moment, then frowned slightly and said, the Sorcerer Tower is still operating. Although the energy consumption is very serious. But I can feel that the magic lock is still supplying energy to the element pool. This wizard tower has been running for so many years, there must be a Thaling in charge of maintenance. They approached the magic lock. Sauron's memory was excellent. He led them along the same path as last time, through the magic lock, and approached the wizard tower. Alert! Warning! However, as soon as they got close to the tower, a mechanical voice, intruder detected. Intruder detected intruder. Combat state activated. Guardian Golem, charge. Not. Sauron's face changed drastically in an instant, and he said solemnly, retreat. It's dangerous here. As soon as his voice fell, a loud rumbling sound was heard. Then, 3 extremely tall diamond golems appeared, locked onto them, and quickly rushed over. Retreat. Soren jumped back, and the others followed. The diamond golem's resistance was very high. Even a legendary spell might not be able to break them, and it was even more difficult to deal with them by relying on melee. Even Gloria's wizard tower didn't have such a top-level golem. This won't do. Fallen Witch followed them out of the magic lock and said, the first layer of defense is so strong, it's impossible for us to enter. There must be a half-plane in a wizard tower of this level, and I'm afraid there are countless dangers. Even the Eye of the North may not be able to come back alive. We have to find a way to cut off its energy supply. Speaking of which, Gloria and her mother couldn't help but look at the location of the magic lock. The magic lock was not only a large-scale defense facility, but also a part of the energy supply. The total energy consumption of a wizard tower was very large. If converted into electricity, it would require at least a nuclear power plant to maintain the supply. Therefore, as a defense facility, the magic lock also bore a part of the energy consumption of the wizard tower. As long as the wizard tower in front of them was still operating, even a legendary team may not be able to enter alive. Is there a way to cut off its energy supply? Gloria gently lifted her long hair and turned to look at her mother. She was obsessed with the knowledge of the Arcane Empire, and she should be the most familiar with it among the people present. Fallen Witch slightly frowned, looked at the huge magic lock in front of them, and slowly said, it's very difficult. But we can try, but we have to break this ancient magic lock. This may take a long time. As long as there is no wizard controlling it, the wizard tower will only operate according to the original set program. Thaling shouldn't have the authority to take over the magic lock. So, we have a 50% chance of breaking this magic lock. This time, the exploration was fruitless. The Diamond Golem and Thaling were a solid line of defense. Soren could barely deal with 1 Diamond Golem, but if 3 Diamond Golems attacked at the same time, even a legendary warrior wouldn't be able to withstand a round of attacks. If they wanted to explore this wizard tower, they had to cut off its energy supply. Therefore, they had to cut off its energy supply. The adept tower that maintained its operation was too terrifying. If they rashly went in, there was only a slim chance of survival. As long as the energy supply was cut off, the guardian golems would not be able to operate. The defense system in the wizard tower would be automatically removed. It would only rely on the energy stored in the elemental pool to maintain a small part of the defense program. The technology of the Arcane Empire had a high demand for energy. This was similar to modern technology. Without electricity and fuel, many things would become decorations. At that time, the difficulty of exploration would plummet. Soren didn't have any impulsive thoughts of taking risks in this kind of legendary challenge. Because his bloody experience in the past told him that anything related to the Arcane Empire couldn't be taken lightly. So everything had to be planned in the long run. Gloria and others were responsible for unlocking the magic lock and cutting off the energy attack of the wizard tower, while Soren was ready to set off to find the other 3 elemental stones. If he could collect them, not only could he get a piece of Shard of Divinity, but he could also summon an elemental legion to replace the warriors as expendable cannon fodder when exploring the wizard tower. Therefore, in the middle of March, Soren embarked on the road to the north. This time, he wanted to cross the north, fly over the rolling mountains and enter the Frost Kingdom. He had memorized the teleportation coordinates. As long as he mastered the 5th circle's teleportation spell, he could return to the outer islands at any time. This was the convenience of being a wizard. Chapter 369. This time, Soren left after making full preparations. Before leaving, he drew a further blueprint for the outer islands. According to his original layout, the population of Mordor City was about 50,000 people, which was already a large city in the current era. The port was still operated by the Church of Wealth and the Sea Church. Soren paid more attention to the land, and his future focus was also on the land. When his strength had accumulated to a certain extent, he might directly go to Treasure Island, where the wealth was enough to easily replace the overseas trade. After all, no matter how profitable the trade was, it was not as profitable as mining gold. In the future, it would be quite difficult to change from a pirate to a higher class without the support of a gold mine. Note, Treasure Island was mentioned before, and the outer islands have rich mineral resources. It was much more convenient to travel alone. Soren directly drove the ghost ship, Deadman's Voice, along the overseas route to Shipwreck Bay. There was no need to resupply on the way. After a little inspection of the slave black market, he went to the north. The north was located in the northwest of the continent. The Frost Kingdom was located in the northernmost position, so Soren's voyage this time was quite long. If he wanted to collect the other 3 elemental stones, he would need to travel almost half of the continent. From the south to the north, from the north to the east, and finally across the Desert of Death into the Underdark, because the last elemental stone was somewhere in the Underdark. A place where he might encounter a beholder. Back in the north again, Soren's mood was very different. He landed from the deepwater port and left the ghost ship in the nearby sea. The port was still bustling with noise and excitement. However, in the noisy crowd, there were many more people with weapons. Even some half-grown children had a dagger hidden in their waists. Soren could not help but frown slightly. He walked along the road and saw many wanted posters as he approached the gate of the deepwater port. There were humans, dwarves, and lizard men. The security here seemed to have deteriorated a lot compared to the last time he was here. Dozens of arrest warrants of various sizes were pasted on a notice board. The guards in charge of patrolling were also much more nervous than before. They were not as lazy as they used to be. The Adventurers Guild was more lively than before. There was even a bulletin board outside with many tasks written in bright red. For example, the few pieces in front of him. 100 miles south of the deepwater port, ancient tree town has been attacked by the dark-scaled lizard men. The number of enemies is small, and the danger level is C. The mission reward is 1,200 Kindler coins. This is an emergency mission. There will be additional rewards after completion. Ogres have appeared near Faulkner Town. Recently, people have been disappearing one after another. The mayor wants to ask someone to investigate this matter and determine the number and traces of the ogres. The reward is 300 Kindler coins, and there will be additional rewards for assisting the town guards in killing the ogres. Yesterday, the Deepwater port found a strange fog in the nearby waters. Some merchant sailors said that they had seen traces of the ghost ship. This is a special mission. Anyone with clues will be rewarded. Mission difficulty, B rank. Perhaps it was because the timeline was getting closer and closer to the time of turmoil. The Adventurers Guild had issued more quests than before. However, what made Soren feel a little bit dumbfounded was that there were more than a dozen bulletin boards outside, and the difficulty of the missions ranged from F to C. The only B rank mission was to investigate the strange fog that appeared in the Deepwater port yesterday. Needless to say, it must be because of Soren's arrival. Before he got close, he activated the fog summoning ability of the dead man's voice, but he didn't expect that the nearby sailors still saw a trace of it. That was why today's B rank mission was a special investigation mission. It was really surprising to think about it. Soren also received missions from the Adventurers Guild in the past, but he didn't expect that one day, he would also receive a difficult investigation mission. There was a team gathering outside the city gate. Before Soren walked out of the town, he saw the militia training. Most of them were adult men, and there were many 15 or 16-year-old children. In previous years, the militia training would not be conducted in March, which was the busy period of farming. The training would be conducted during the slack period after the wheat harvest. Therefore, as long as someone took a look at the situation, they could guess that there was a problem with the security nearby. Something big must have happened nearby for the militia to be urgently trained. Otherwise, how could there be such a time to plant spring wheat? Soren did not stay here. In fact, he had already been mentally prepared for the arrival of chaos. A catastrophe was far more than what he saw in front of him. When the real chaos came, it would be the real outbreak of the disaster. If there were no accidents. Soren should arrive in the Frost Kingdom tomorrow, but just after he left the Deepwater port, a little accident happened. He saw a pile of corpses. Strictly speaking, it was a pile of corpses that had been dead for a while, and the corpses had basically begun to rot. The reason why Soren was alarmed was the stench that came from here. Corpses were not rare in this era. If it were just corpses, Soren would not care at all. However, these corpses had a distinct feature that made Soren stop. Their eyeballs were all dug out. Strictly speaking, their eyeballs were taken out. Bloody eye sockets, the eyeballs of all the corpses had been taken out. There were signs of battle on their bodies. Judging from the signs of struggle in some places, some of them had their eyeballs dug out while they were still alive, and then their throats were slit by the enemy. It was a very familiar killing method. Soren glanced at these corpses and could not help but murmur, "The unseen." Has this group of people appeared? The unseen. A Cthulhu church that was not very powerful, but not weak either. They believed in Cthulhu without eyeballs. These people liked to dig out the eyeballs of their enemies after defeating them, or sacrifice to the Cthulhu they believed in with a massacre. Finally, they would dig out the eyeballs of the people they killed as a sacrifice. The reason why Soren knew them was very simple. He had received a mission to investigate another Cthulhu church. That Cthulhu church was called the Blind. There were certain similarities between the two fallen evil organizations. Soren had encountered the followers of the unseen when he was investigating the Blind. Die. Evil people. When Soren looked at these corpses, he pondered for a moment and was about to leave. Suddenly, a spell that made him extremely uncomfortable appeared, and then the paladin's signature spell, Detect Evil, fell on him. It was as if a mine was triggered. Soren's body exploded with an extremely rich blood-red light in an instant. As the most powerful pirate king on the south coast, Soren's hands were now covered in blood. Although he brought order to the south coast and made the lives of ordinary merchants much more stable. But it was undeniable that he controlled the black market trade, the slave trade, and squeezed other merchants for protection money. Therefore, no matter from which point of view, the evil aura on Soren's body was very strong. In this world, there was only one kind of person who would detect evil, on others without even asking. That was the paladin. Soren's body showed a trace of murderous intent. If there was anything in this world that he hated the most, it was undoubtedly the paladin who detect evil, on others. So at this moment, he had the urge to kill. But what he didn't expect was that the paladin in front of him was the first one to shout, "Die." It was a young and handsome man. He looked like a noble because he was wearing a gorgeous full-body armor. After he detect evil, on Soren, he had a righteous expression on his face and directly slashed at him with his sword. At first glance, this paladin didn't have much combat experience. The distance between the two hadn't closed, but he had already begun to accelerate. Soren could even see the trajectory of his attack with his eyes closed. This was a rookie who lacked experience. He estimated that his profession level was around grade 3, and if he wasn't wrong, it should be around grade 12. From the color of the magic aura, Soren didn't belong to the kind of people who committed heinous crimes. Therefore, after seeing such a rich blood-red light, the paladin didn't hesitate to attack. In his opinion, Soren belonged to the kind of sinner who should be judged directly. Don't be impulsive. Come back. You're crazy. Don't detect evil. A female voice came from behind the young paladin, and there were 2 or 3 other mixed voices. It seemed that this was a team of adventurers. The paladin seemed to have taken over the role of a warrior. They looked like a team of adventurers who had accepted a certain mission. And the paladin in front, after seeing the pile of corpses and Soren standing next to them, his first reaction was not to ask, but to throw out, "Detect evil." What the F***ck? With a clang, Soren instantly pulled out his curved sword, icing death, and then rushed forward at high speed like a monk. After swinging his sword to block the paladin's attack, he slashed at his head. No! There was a cry of alarm. 3 figures rushed out from the side of the woods. One of the female voices sounded familiar to Soren. There were quite few people who could make him feel familiar, so after a moment of hesitation, he twisted his sword and replaced the blade with the back of the sword. Clang! Thump! The young paladin was knocked unconscious and fell to the ground like an onion. Soren turned to look at the 4 adventurers who were approaching. He glanced at them and immediately found a familiar figure. Annalyn. The young priestess who had helped them in Amber City. P.S. That's all for today. Chapter 370. Swoosh. A sharp arrow flew out from the front. Soren's ears moved slightly, and he frowned. In an instant, his hand moved as fast as lightning, and in front of the other party's incredulous expression, he directly caught the arrow with his bare hands. Catching an arrow with his bare hands. There was dead silence all around, and the thief who had just shot an arrow could not help but open his mouth wide. He had just seen the paladin being stunned by Soren, and without thinking much, he shot an arrow to avoid the enemy, but he did not expect that the other party could catch the arrow with his bare hands. It was almost instantaneous. The adventurer team in front of him realized that all of them together might not be a match for this man. Soren looked at the group in front of him. A paladin, a priest, a rogue, and a ranger. The last person was wearing a robe, so it was hard to tell, but the probability of him being a spellcaster was very high. He was either a wizard or a warlock. This was a standard adventurer team. The paladin and the ranger replaced the warrior and barbarian. The rogue looked like a veteran, and his reaction was the fastest among all of them. This kind of adventurer team configuration was enough to deal with most situations. The expression on the young priest's face changed very quickly. At first, it was worry and surprise, then doubt and contemplation, and then there was a look of shock on her face. Because she recognized Soren in front of her. Half a year. Soren's appearance did not change much. What really changed was his aura. From a lowly thief in Amber City to the most powerful pirate king on the South Coast. The changes that happened to him made his aura completely different. You. The young priest could not help but take a step forward in surprise. The rogue next to her was very alert and pulled her back. And Leah still had an expression of disbelief and murmured, "You are Soren?" They knew each other. Hearing the young priest in front of them call out Soren's name, the others could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Because the man in front of her was unbeatable. If they knew him, they might be able to avoid this battle. Even though they hadn't fought yet, the other adventurers in the party were already drenched in cold sweat. Soren had taken countless lives along the way, and this kind of murderous aura was not something adventurers of their level could handle. Not to mention, Soren also had the terrifying gaze of divinity. If it was someone with a slightly weaker willpower, they might have been so scared that their legs would have gone soft. Clang! Soren sheathed his curved sword and looked at the priestess in front of him. He nodded and said, "Long time no see." "You." The priestess had a complicated expression on her face as she slowly said, "You're not dead. This is great. After what happened that day, I've been worried about you and Vivian's safety. But when I went to the slums the next day, it was already in ruins. I searched for a long time, but I couldn't find any trace of you. Is Vivian okay?" The expression on Soren's face softened a little, and he said softly, "Vivian is fine. We've already left Amber City a day in advance." The priestess's face was full of doubts. It seemed that she had a lot of questions in her heart, such as why Soren would appear here, and how did his strength become so strong in just a little more than half a year. After such a big incident in Amber City, she also put in double the effort and finally became a grade 3 priestess. But now, it seemed that she might not be able to win against Soren. Soren didn't mean to say too much. He glanced at the other adventurers in the party and said in a deep voice, "Are you here because of other missions, or are you here to investigate the unseen?" Silence. Facing Soren's question, the others were obviously silent. The priestess's face was a little hesitant. She gritted her teeth and said, "We received a mission to investigate their identity." "Are they called the unseen? Do you know their identity? You don't even know the situation of the unseen?" Soren shook his head after hearing this sentence. He didn't know if they were too bold or eager to die. He said in a deep voice, "If it's really to investigate the unseen, I suggest you go back now and ask the higher-ups to send high-grade professions. With your current strength, it's okay if you can't find them, but if you find them, I'm afraid none of you can go back alive." Alarmist talk? Or is it true? Soren's words made the others' faces dignified. The ranger and the thief next to him looked at each other and bowed slightly. "Your Excellency. Do you know their situation? These people have killed many ordinary people. Recently, some people from the church have been investigating them. With Soren's strength, whether good or evil, he was worthy of them calling him Your Excellency." Soren looked down at the unconscious paladin, thought for a moment, and said, "The Unseen. An organization that believes in evil gods. They like to dig out the eyeballs of their enemies after killing them, and they prefer to dig out the eyeballs of living people directly during sacrificial ceremonies. I'm not sure what kind of followers they have, but I know that there are 2 legendary professions among them. With your strength, you're simply going to die." Silence. The young priestess's expression was a little stiff, and she slowly said, "But the church has no way to mobilize more people. Recently, the vampires' movements have been abnormal, and high-grade priests have been sent to deal with those vampires." Vampires? Is it related to the demigod vampire? Soren frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "What's wrong with the vampires recently?" The young priestess's face showed a little hesitation, and then she said, "There are many vampire servants in the south and north. We suspect that there is a vampire church that is constantly turning ordinary people into vampires. Recently, the priests of the God of Light are gathering people. The spread of vampires has greatly threatened the lives of ordinary people. All the high-grade members in the church have been sent to deal with them." It seemed that it was really the demigod vampire Reinhardt. As the son of fear who ascended as a vampire, he had to have enough believers if he wanted to expand his divine power. Ordinary people couldn't become his believers. His core clergy was the Lord of Vampires, which greatly limited the scope of his believers. So if he wanted to expand his faith, he must turn others into vampires. But the number of vampires was too large, and it would threaten ordinary people. After all, the source of food for vampires was needless to say. The appearance of too many vampire servants was definitely a disaster for ordinary people. This kind of thing was bound to attract the attention of the God of Light. As a follower of the Light of Dawn, the young priestess often needed to cooperate with the Church of the God of Light. Because the Light of Dawn was one of the gods of the God of Light. Do you want to help her? Soren's heart couldn't help but fall into contemplation. He still had some confidence in dealing with the unseen, but he didn't like to deal with the paladins, and others may not trust him. But if he helped them get rid of the unseen, maybe he could find a way to let the people of the God of Light concentrate on dealing with the demigod vampire. As the backbone of the good faction, they would never allow creatures like vampires to spread. That was to say, the God of Light and the demigod vampire were more antagonistic, and it was basically impossible to reconcile. The demigod vampire was Soren's biggest enemy at present. And he, as the biggest pirate king on the south coast, might not be his opponent now. After all, the other party had succeeded in becoming a god. Soren didn't like to owe others. So after thinking for a moment, he said in a deep voice, "Follow me. I'll help you track them." After that, he turned and walked in one direction. The adventurers behind him looked at each other in surprise, and finally turned their eyes to the young priestess. After seeing her nod, they immediately came forward to help the unconscious paladin, and then quickly followed the pace of Soren. A rogue who seemed to be at the legendary level. If they had the help of this rogue, they would undoubtedly have a high chance of winning against the unseen. Soren's tracking ability had always been strong. Basically, his basic skills had been improved slightly after every battle, but because these improvements were relatively scattered, he didn't care much about the improvement of 1 or 2 points of basic skills. Naturally, there was no need to pay too much attention to it. Note, the increase of 1 or 2 points after each battle is not specifically listed. At present, his overall basic skills had all improved by 20 or 30 points compared to the past, and the improvement in wilderness survival, search, intimidation, and listening were even more obvious. Soren's tracking speed was very fast. The adventurers behind could only wake up the paladin and then quickly follow up. There was a sound of argument behind him. It seemed that the paladin who woke up still wanted to destroy the evil. Soren was not interested in this at all, but if the other party dared to come up again, he would never be merciful. A day's time passed like this. Soren followed the traces left behind at high speed, and the adventurers behind followed all the way. The paladin seemed to be very repulsed by him, but because he was defeated by Soren in one move, there was still a little fear in his eyes. If a war really broke out, they estimated that they wouldn't last more than a few minutes in Soren's hands. The next day, the traces of Soren's tracking became more and more obvious. The unseen were obviously moving in a large group, and there were probably more than 10 of them, so the traces left behind were more obvious. They tracked the unseen all the way to a place called Withered Leaf Town in the north. As they approached the town, the traces left by the unseen in the wilderness faded a lot, but according to Soren's intuition, the unseen should have entered the town. "It's here." He stopped, turned to look at the others, and said in a deep voice, "The unseen should be inside. Your goal is too obvious. Let's split up and move in pairs." Chapter 371. As soon as he heard that they were going to split up, the young paladin immediately wanted to object. But at this time, the young priestess glanced at him and said, "Okay. Let's do it this way. You two go together. Dino, you follow Lancaster. I'll go with Soren." The paladin opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by the veteran rogue next to him. He seemed to have guessed a little bit of Soren's identity. In fact, this veteran rogue had seen Soren's curved sword several times along the way. As a rogue, he had some understanding of the legendary figures of his profession. Yesterday, he followed Soren for a whole day. The more he looked at Soren, the more he felt that Soren was the legendary beheader, the most powerful pirate king on the south coast. For this existence, the outside world had different opinions. Some people thought that he was a formidable figure, while others thought that he was too ruthless. But there was no doubt that if anyone angered His Excellency the Beheader, they would end up in a terrible state. If the man in front of them was really Soren, the most powerful pirate king on the south coast, then they had better listen to his arrangements completely. Because compared to this rapidly rising legend, they were just a group of third-rate adventurers. This veteran rogue still believed in his own eyes. According to his judgment, there was an 80% chance that the other party was the pirate king on the south coast. In fact, he was not the only one who guessed this. The young priestess had more or less guessed this in her heart. But she did not ask, because now was not the time to ask. The group soon split up. Soren entered from the other side with the young priestess, and the others entered the town in batches. The two of them acted together, and the target was much smaller. In this era, the vigilance against foreign adventurers was still very strong. A group of more than 5 people would easily attract the attention of people with bad intentions. The two of them easily entered the town and then came to the inn here. The young priestess was silent behind them, and her expression was a little complicated. Yes. Her heart was also very complicated. Back then, she had looked down on Soren. It wasn't because she hated Soren, but because she liked Vivian very much. She also thought that a petty thief like Soren wouldn't be able to give Vivian a good life. Then, she kindly suggested that Vivian become a priestess and find a way to help Soren find a job that was more respectable. Unfortunately, Soren rejected her without hesitation. In the eyes of the priestess at the time, Soren was unappreciative of her kindness. However, time proved that she was wrong. Looking at Soren's current strength, the equipment he had, and the aura he exuded from his every move, everything told her that the petty thief of the past was no longer the same person he used to be. Not only had he become a powerhouse in the legendary realm, he might even be a character who could shake the south coast with a stomp of his feet. Whether good or evil, right or wrong, Soren's achievements had exceeded her imagination. The young priestess thought about a lot of things in her heart. After seeing that there was no one else nearby, she finally gathered her courage and said, "Soren. Is the person on the south coast really you? I always thought it was just the same name." Soren didn't answer, but nodded gently. The young priestess was shocked. She finally got the answer, but the shock in her heart was not small at all. How long has it been? From the disaster of Amber City until now, she had started a life of adventure because her original temple was destroyed. She thought her progress was fast enough, but now she had just become an official priestess, and Soren had become the legendary most powerful pirate king on the south coast. She suddenly felt that fate was unpredictable. "Come with me." Soren glanced at the people near the inn, then grabbed the young priestess behind him and took her into an alley. The young priestess was a little stunned when he grabbed her hand, but she quickly reacted and said, "You found those unseen? Where are they?" "No." Soren shook his head and said in a deep voice, "There are vampires here." "Vampires?" The young priestess looked a little stunned and murmured, "Vampires? Have they already developed to this point?" Soren's senses were very sharp. As a top rogue in the Grey Domain, he also knew a lot about dark creatures. Just glancing in the inn, he found that there were 1 or 2 people in a somewhat abnormal state. Their skin was too pale. As residents of a town of this size, these people had to work hard every day. It was difficult for people who worked for a long time to have pale skin like them. Moreover, these people looked quite strong. At the same time, their breathing was very weak, not as strong as ordinary people. Soren's powerful observation ability could find that the rise and fall of their chests was significantly lower than that of ordinary people, only about 1/3 of the strength of ordinary people when they breathed. If a normal person breathed like this, they would probably be a little short of oxygen. They're vampires. And they should be vampire servants who had just been converted not long ago. They didn't know how to disguise themselves to look more like ordinary people. The son of the vampire? Soren's brows could not help but frown, and he secretly said in his heart, his power has grown so fast. He actually developed his minions to such a remote place. No. The more prosperous the place, the more powerful the church organization. These relatively remote towns are the places where it is easy for him to enter. The prosperous areas were divided by the gods' churches, and it was not easy for the son of the vampire to enter. In other words, these more remote towns were weak in defense, and it was easy for vampires to infiltrate, and then gradually spread his faith and expand the number of followers of the son of the vampire. What do we do now? The young priestess looked at him and asked. Soren glanced around, took her and continued to walk forward, and said in a deep voice, let's find a place to stay for the night first. Vampires like to move at night. I'll follow them and see what I can find. If the unseen are also here, there will definitely be some interaction with them. The power of the son of the vampire must be suppressed. Recently, the information collected by Soren was not very good for him in all aspects, especially the strength of the son of the vampire, which made Soren feel a deep threat. Okay. The young priestess nodded. On the other side. The group of people who acted separately were also preparing to go around to the other side to enter Withered Leaf Town. What? The paladin's face showed a hint of surprise and murmured, you said he is the legendary beheader, Soren? How could Anlai know him? When he heard his companion say the true identity of Soren, even if he was a paladin, he couldn't help but feel cold sweat on his back. That was the most ruthless pirate king in the rumors. Maybe he didn't have any cruel behavior, but his style of doing things was extremely ruthless. There were rumors that almost thousands of people died under his hands. The paladin was not an idiot. There were so many evil deeds in the world, and it was difficult for them to control them all. Therefore, the paladin's doctrine also warned them not to act blindly. If he didn't know the identity of Soren, maybe he would still dare to fight, but after knowing the identity of Soren, he had no desire to fight in his heart. Because he was no match for him at all. He even knew very well what kind of disaster it would bring to the adventurer team if he angered the legendary pirate king. It should be him. The veteran rogue's attitude towards Soren was very good, and even had a bit of admiration. He said in a deep voice, worthy of being one of the strongest rogues in the legends. To be able to become the most powerful pirate king on the south coast in just a few months. His strength can be said to be unfathomable. When he first fought with you, he didn't even use much of his strength. Heroes were rarely born from rogues. The main reason was that rogues had no advantage in frontal combat, and their fighting style was used to assassination, spying, sneak attacks, and so on. Therefore, most rogues liked to hide behind the scenes, which was safer for them. Soren was definitely an accident. In recent hundreds of years, there were very few rogues like him who appeared in the front, and he was a rogue swordsman with a tough fighting style. He was like the protagonist in the anecdotes of bards. In fact, the story of the rise of the evil pirate king based on Soren had already appeared in the bards' mouths, but most of them were negative comments. People regarded him as one of the most terrible pirate kings of this era. The bards would not be so bored as to describe a pirate king as a legendary hero. People's understanding of him was more of fear. But this was different among rogues. There were also legendary figures among rogues, but many of them did not show up at all, or they were mysterious figures who only left some legendary names. This was also conducive to their safety. Soren was the only legendary rogue who stood on the stage and was the leader of a force. Even if it was an organization like the Shadow Thieves that had been around for many years, the leader of the force would not blatantly let others know like him. Basically, nearly half of the rogues in the world had heard of his name, and many of them admired him. Because the rogue's concept of good and evil was weak, many rogues started as thieves. There were even legends that the beheader, Soren, was just an inconspicuous thief in the past. The rogues were more optimistic about the rising figures of this profession. So Soren's reputation was very high among the rogues. Wait. The experienced rogue walking in front suddenly stopped, and then quickly came to a cemetery, and said in a deep voice, "Look at these graves. The tombstones have been standing for a long time, but the soil was recently turned over." Hearing his words, the others immediately woke up and quickly came to the cemetery. Chapter 372. On the side of Withered Leaf Town was a graveyard. In this era, the remote towns rarely placed the graveyard too far away. This was similar to the tombs in the East. The graveyards were concentrated near the gathering place. Originally, other people would not pay so much attention to the graveyard when passing by, but most of the rogues served as scouts in the adventurer team. Naturally, their observation ability was much stronger. The veteran rogue glanced around and found that some of the graves in the graveyard were not right. The soil looked like it was newly turned. It should have been a few days ago. The ranger picked up a handful of soil and looked at it. He also pulled out the weeds that originally grew on the graves. He said with a dignified expression, "At most 7 days ago, someone dug up these graves. The tombstones were re-erected later. Someone moved the graves." This discovery made the other people present look dignified. The spellcaster, who had been silent from beginning to end, looked around, then cast a spell similar to detection, and then said, "It was not done by the necromancer. There is no breath of the undead nearby. The graveyard here has been blessed by the priest, and it will not automatically give birth to the undead." The paladin's expression was a little angry, and he said in a deep voice, "Then who did it? Blaspheming the dead is a heavy sin." The secular world still respected the dead. Generally, after being buried, they should not be disturbed. Most of the laws strictly prohibited this kind of behavior. "Open it and see," the rogue said with a dignified expression. The 4 people present heard this and looked at each other. The paladin's expression was a little hesitant, but in the end, they nodded. There was something strange about the graveyard. Soon, they dug up one of the graves that had been turned over, and then they found that the coffin in the grave was empty. Dark creatures. The ranger sniffed inside and said in a deep voice, "This disgusting smell is definitely from dark creatures. I remember their hatred very clearly." The rogue observed the situation of the grave and said slowly, "It may be vampires. Maybe this place has also been infiltrated by the Church of Vampires." Soren still didn't know the situation in the graveyard. However, it was much easier for him to find vampires than these people. As the sky gradually darkened, he quietly entered the tavern. The tavern was very lively. Next to the bar, there was a bard who looked quite down and out. Although bards were also one of the professions, many of them were not doing well because this profession was too versatile. There were very few powerful bards. It was a complete accident that there was someone like the Helpheimer. Most of the bards were like the one in front of him, pleasing others with their performances in exchange for some rewards. Occasionally, some good-looking bards could hook up with some noble ladies, so they could earn some extra money. Third-rate casting ability, third-rate combat ability, and third-rate thief techniques. Together, these are the bards. There had been some powerful bards in the past, but in order for this class to be powerful, they had to have high stats. Even Soren's stats might not be enough to support a bard that was strong in all aspects. Back then, the bards who could do this basically had special adventures or received help from the gods. In the past, there was a point of view that only those with 18 initial stats could become top-level bards. If their initial stats were that high, then they would be first-rate spellcasters, first-rate warriors, and first-rate thieves. Unfortunately, there were too few of them. And no matter what profession they advanced into, they would be the best. After all, Soren's initial stats weren't that high. The bard was telling a story in a unique way in the north, and the protagonist of the story was called Soren. That's right, he was talking about the battle between Soren and the pirate king Ashrod. This was the largest naval battle on the south coast in decades. It was spreading in all directions at a very fast speed. More and more ordinary people heard about this battle. However, the bard's story had nothing to do with the battle. In his words, the battle was more like a duel between nobles. Soren and Ashrod fought for 300 rounds. In the end, the more evil decapitator Soren killed the pirate king Ashrod and pleased the cruel sea goddess. That was the story. The main point of the story was the battle between Soren and Ashrod. How the two sides fought back and forth, and how the decapitator Soren killed the other pirate king. Most of the bard's stories were unreliable, but this artistic way of expression undoubtedly attracted the attention of others. Soren was a little surprised. He was a little unaccustomed to being the protagonist of the story, especially when the bard said that his strength was weaker than Ashrod, and that he needed to use tricks to defeat him. Soren's target soon appeared. When the sky gradually darkened, two slightly sneaky figures walked out. He quietly got up and hid in the shadows, then followed behind them. The two new vampire servants didn't find him, and it was impossible for them to find Soren's trace. They crossed the street and came to a rather luxurious mansion. Nobles. The ruler of Withered Leaf Town seemed to be a lord whose name Soren didn't remember. The two vampires entered from the back door, and it was not convenient for Soren to follow them directly. He could only wait for them to enter, and quietly climbed into the yard. The breath of dark creatures. As soon as Soren entered, he felt the breath of dark creatures. There didn't seem to be many living people in the mansion. Sure enough, there is a problem here. He sneaked in with a serious expression and said to himself, no wonder the vampires were lurking here and no one found them. It seems that the nobles who ruled here have been corrupted by them. With the upper nobles hiding the truth, even if there were signs of the spread of vampires, it could be temporarily covered up. The north was the territory of the witches. Such a remote place was a blind spot for them to manage, and the power of the temple was also quite weak. They must be destroyed. Soren frowned and listened to the movement, then quietly approached the hall. The power of the demigod vampire could not be further expanded, and this matter must be reported to the Witch Council. Presumably, they would not want a large number of vampires to appear in their territory. Patter. There was a very light sound of footsteps. Just as Soren entered the mansion, another figure followed in, but the figure who followed in was a bit special because his eyes were covered with bandages. His eye sockets were slightly sunken, as if there were no eyeballs inside. Chapter 373. As soon as Soren stepped in, a figure followed him in. However, he did not go straight to the front door like Soren, but quietly entered one of the rooms from the side window. The rooms here were lavishly decorated, somewhat out of place compared to this remote town. There were even some extremely expensive oriental porcelain placed on the wall shelf in the corner. The floor was covered with a soft carpet, and the quilt in the room was expensive velvet. From any point of view, the decoration here was not something a small noble in a remote area could enjoy. There was not much farmland in Withered Leaf Town, and there were not many specialties. The tax was mainly based on the rent collected by the lord. This money was barely enough to maintain a decent life. It was estimated that in some larger cities, slightly wealthy merchants could live more comfortably than this kind of noble. But now looking at the decoration inside this house, it was at least the level of a Viscount noble, which was the luxurious decoration of a middle-level noble's private manor. This noble's background may not be clean. Soren walked around this rather luxurious mansion and realized that the identity of the other party may not be clean. Simply put, normal income could not support this kind of life. Ordinary bedrooms were decorated at this level. It was estimated that the master's bedroom was comparable to Gloria's bedroom in Whiterun City. What was Gloria's identity? She was a member of the Northern Witch Council and the actual ruler of a northern city. The gap between the status of the two was not comparable. Soren, who was moving forward, suddenly stopped. He was completely invisible and sneak, so he was not worried about being discovered by others. Just now, a vampire servant walked in front of him and did not notice Soren, who was standing 1 meter in front of him. Unless Soren had an obvious smell of blood and relied on the vampire's blood-tracking ability to find him, it was basically impossible for them to detect the existence of Soren. There was a slight noise in another room. Soren took a step back vigilantly, and then saw the door of a room with a window on the side open, but he did not see anyone. The door was gently opened and then gently closed. A rogue. There was another high-grade rogue here. The opponent's stealth ability was on par with Soren's. Soren couldn't see through the opponent's stealth, and the opponent didn't seem to notice Soren either. If it wasn't for the door suddenly opening, the two of them would have to be close enough to discover each other based on their senses and accumulated experience. But now that Soren had confirmed his opponent's location, he had the upper hand. If he wanted to, he could even kill his target within 3 seconds. But if he did that, his tracks would be exposed. Soren's curiosity was piqued, and he temporarily suppressed the thought of confirming the other party's identity. Instead, he quietly followed behind and put some distance between them. He wanted to see what the other party was trying to find out. He was definitely not a vampire. Not many people would be bored enough to sneak around in their own territory. It was obvious that he had waited for the vampire servant to leave before coming out. It was very likely that he was a lurker from another force. In such a remote town, other than Soren the Unseen, he couldn't think of any other high-level rogue. This house was relatively large. The rogue in front seemed to be familiar with it. He must have secretly come to investigate. Soren saw that he came to a door and then opened a door that led to the basement. Creak. When the door was opened, there was an obvious sound. The rogue in front seemed to be a little nervous. After opening the door, he quietly sneaked in and then closed the door behind him. Closing the door behind him was undoubtedly not a good habit. Soren had no choice but to wait for a while, and then gently opened the door. There were torches on both sides of the basement, and there were stairs below that led to the depths. It seemed that there was also a tunnel. It seemed that this place had been here for a long time. As soon as he entered the basement, Soren smelled a faint smell of blood. At the corner of the stairs, he saw a limp corpse. The killing method was very simple. It was a very simple kill, directly hitting the enemy's heart, and then twisting the enemy's neck. It's a master. Soren glanced at the corpse, and his expression gradually became serious. The vitality of a vampire servant was very tenacious. To be able to kill it in one blow was definitely not something an ordinary rogue could do. Either he was an experienced veteran, or he was a high-level professional with a profession level of 16 or above. Soren saw a little bit of the assassin's ruthlessness from the position where the corpse was hit. This guy may have received combat training as an assassin. Along the passage, there were some strange murals. Soren didn't have time to look at them, because he found 2 more corpses in front of him. Strength close to legendary. Soren glanced at the 2 corpses lying in the corner, and his expression became more and more serious. These 2 enemies were killed in one blow, without alerting the others, and at the same time, 2 enemies were killed at the same time. Even with Soren's current ability, it wasn't that easy. The rogue in front of him might have a profession level of 18 or above. That was to say, he was at least a quasi-legendary rogue. As he went deeper and deeper, Soren's vision gradually widened. In front of him, there was a large secret room. The most eye-catching thing was an altar-like building. In the center of the altar, there was a blood pool, and there were several smaller blood pools around it. No wonder these vampires didn't find out that their companions were killed. The smell of blood here was too strong, and it was basically impossible for them to smell other blood. The altar of the demigod vampire. As a dark creature that fed on the blood of the living, Soren naturally didn't expect to see anything good near their altar. However, looking at the size of these blood pools, it seemed that the vampires had been here for some time. Without dozens or hundreds of missing people, it was impossible to fill these blood pools. There was a prayer ceremony in the altar. In the center was a priest wearing a black robe, followed by an old man who was obviously dressed like a noble. Vampires didn't age, so his current appearance undoubtedly meant that he was transformed into a vampire after his body entered the state of old age. As for the reason for becoming a vampire, it was estimated that there were only a few reasons. A fanatical prayer ceremony. Soren didn't find the first rogue, but he could be sure that the other party was hiding somewhere nearby. Bring up the sacrifice. After completing the last prayer, the black-robed priest ordered the believers kneeling under the altar. Soon, one of them was brought to the front of the altar. His body was shackled with chains. From the back, he didn't seem to be an ordinary person. To deal with ordinary people, these vampires didn't need to be shackled with steel. This was a profession. Soren couldn't see the other party's appearance from the back, and he couldn't judge his profession. He could only be sure that he should be a melee profession. However, as the man was brought up as a sacrifice, Soren immediately found that the nearby shadows were distorted. Kneel. The black-robed priest shouted with a cold expression, but what responded to him was thick phlegm and a fanatical voice. The blind one is the true God. You false God believers won't be able to live for long. Boom. A heavy punch came out, and the man's words were abruptly choked back. Hearing what he said, Soren immediately figured out the ins and outs of the matter. It seemed that the blind one and the vampire church had a conflict. Both sides wanted to divide this place into their own territory, and it seemed that the blind one believer was captured by the vampire. When the man on the altar was hit by a heavy punch, Soren also saw the other party's appearance when he turned sideways. The man had only one eye, and the other eye socket was empty. A high-grade member of the unseen organization. Only a true fanatic would dig out his own eye. No wonder a high-grade rogue would come to save him. However, how could a rogue defeat these vampires? Soren just had a trace of doubt in his heart when he felt a vibration around him, followed by a violent noise from above. P.S. That's all for today. Chapter 374. There was a loud rumbling sound. Soren seemed to feel the vibration of the explosion, and then the vampire believers in front of him moved quickly. Some pulled out their weapons and prepared to go out to see the situation, while others hid in a panic. There were women among these vampires, and they looked young. She was dressed in a standard lady's dress, and the expression on her face was a little panicked. It seemed that she had no combat experience. However, the black-robed priest's expression was very calm. He ordered a few words in a deep voice and let people go out to check the situation. At the same time, he pulled out a sharp blade and prepared to bleed the captive unseen believers. For any God's church, fanatics were the most important wealth. It was not easy to cultivate a fanatic. No organization would easily give up their fanatics, even the evil God's church. Soren had never tasted defeat all the way, from killing the Swamp King to successfully slaying the dragon, and then the decisive battle with the pirate king Ashrod. After so many battles, there were not many pirates under Soren's command who worshipped him fanatically, but these people were the core cornerstone of his rule on the south coast. As long as these fanatic elite pirates were not exhausted, he could make a comeback in any situation. Under normal circumstances, the number of fanatics within a God's church was at most 1 in 1,000. If it was other forces, this proportion would be even smaller. Soren's elite guards were currently only 100 people. Among them, the proportion of fanatics who worshipped him was less than 1/3. These people had experienced the Battle of the Swamp King, the dragon-slaying battle, and the decisive battle on the south coast. For the unseen organization, a high-grade fanatic could not be easily given up. Just as the black-robed priest was about to cut the throat of the sacrifice, the high-grade rogue who had been hiding in the dark finally could not sit still. A distorted shadow emerged, and the high-grade rogue instantly crossed the plane of space and appeared behind the black-robed priest in the form of Shadow Jump. A fierce cold light emerged. The high-grade rogue instantly stabbed the priest's heart, but what came out was the sound of metal colliding. Clang! The black-robed priest's clothes were torn open, revealing a full-body armor forged with fine steel. Priest was just another name for a priest. Their fighting style was slightly different from that of a priest. However, priests were also people who could use divine spells and were equipped with full-body armor. This kind of profession was like a steel plate, and it was a steel plate profession that could use divine spells. The dagger failed to penetrate the full-body armor of the black-robed priest. The high-grade rogue turned around and slashed, and another cold light appeared and slashed at the shackles of the sacrifice. Crack. A crisp breaking sound was heard, and the steel shackles were directly cut off. Adamantine weapon? Soren, who was hiding in the dark, couldn't help but tremble in shock. He then thought to himself, to be able to directly cut through the shackles made of stainless steel, it seems that apart from first-rate legendary equipment, only adamantine weapons can do that. That ray of light doesn't seem to be a first-rate legendary weapon, so the possibility of it being a fine gold weapon is extremely high. Roar. An angry growl sounded. As soon as his shackles were cut off, the captive on the altar let out a furious roar and directly slammed into the person next to him. Crack. The powerful impact made a vampire's chest cave in. At the same time, the man instantly grabbed the sword and cut off the head of the noblewoman who was panicking at first. A series of slashing and killing. The man seemed to be a high-grade barbarian warrior. In the blink of an eye, he was like a killing machine that killed 3 to 5 vampires. Many of these vampires looked like members of this noble family. The sound of fighting came from the entrance. After the high-grade rogue cut off the steel shackles, he attacked continuously. The storm-like attack forced the black-robed priest to have no chance to use divine spells. He couldn't give the caster a chance, or the consequences would be unimaginable. Clang. 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 But what was quite surprising was that in the face of the ferocious attacks of the high-grade rogue, the black-robed priest blocked them one after another. The weapons he used were a shield and a scepter, and he was not weak at all in a head-on collision. Battle priest. This was a high-grade priest who had received special combat training. He probably also learned the skill of using shields. Another cold light appeared. Soren finally saw the face of the high-grade rogue. The other party's eyes were covered with a black cloth, and there seemed to be nothing inside. He didn't know how he saw the surrounding situation. While he was frantically attacking the black-robed priest in front of him, Soren also locked onto another weapon that was slightly refracting golden light. It was a very small dagger, which did not seem to be his usual weapon. Sure enough, it was a fine gold weapon. This kind of expensive metal was rare in the Underdark. The price of forging large weapons was too expensive. Even forging such a dagger was quite expensive. A small amount of fine gold could be forged into A+1 rare grade equipment. If it continued to be quantified, it would be A+2 or +3 grade equipment. The dagger in front of him was at least A+3 fine gold weapon. On the surface, the percentage of fine gold infiltration was definitely not small. A group of unseen believers attacked. These guys were easy to recognize because many of them were missing an eye. This was a fallen blasphemy ritual. After completing it, they would get an additional blasphemy bonus. The effect was similar to Soren's God's blessing. Many sacrificial demon rituals could also get this blasphemy bonus. The more advanced ones were the emblems on the fallen witch's body, which was the top blasphemy ritual. Soren began to move. The battle between the vampires and the unseen seemed to be a bit of a draw. Dark creatures had a natural attribute bonus, and the blasphemy bonus advantage of the unseen was not obvious. However, Soren was not interested in getting involved in this kind of melee. His goal was the high-grade rogue and the black-robed priest. The fine gold dagger was of great value to him. And the priest was the key to spreading the faith of the gods. If he killed the black-robed priest, the power of the demigod vampire would be severely damaged here. Before launching the attack, Soren tore a piece of cloth from his body and tied it over his eyes. But it was not the kind of thing that was completely blindfolded, just for show. Shadow leap. Shadow strike. Sword form, beheading. Soren's figure suddenly appeared behind the black-robed priest. For the black-robed priest who was resisting the attack of the unseen, Soren's sneak attack was undoubtedly worse. He couldn't even dodge or block, and he was killed under the siege of 2 high-grade rogues. The legendary curved sword in Soren's hand directly cut off the priest's head. With blood gushing out, the headless body of the black-robed priest fell to the ground. The sudden appearance of Soren surprised the unseen. However, as the black-robed priest was beheaded, especially after seeing the black cloth covering Soren's eyes, the unseen could not help but relax a little. But this moment of relaxation was extremely fatal. Soren's expression was cold as he stabbed forward again. In the unseen's somewhat stunned expression, the sword instantly pierced his heart. Pada! Soren threw away the black cloth covering his eyes and crushed the enemy's heart with a backhand twist. The unseen's incredulous expression was still on his face, but his body had lost its breath of life. Bang! The two corpses fell to the ground one after another. Soren quickly took out the fine gold dagger from the unseen's body. A proper strategy could kill the enemy more easily. Soren successfully killed two high-grade professions in one blow, and then instantly activated evade sight and re-entered stealth. The scuffle continued. But now it was time for him to hunt alone. Not good. When a violent explosion came, the priestess's face immediately changed, and then she approached the place where the fire came out. Paladins, rogues, rangers, and other figures soon appeared. The movement here alarmed many people, and even the town's guards quickly approached. However, they needed time to assemble, so there was no need to expect too much from the guards of a remote town. It's the unseen. The ranger was the first to rush into the burning mansion. He glanced at the corpses nearby and said in a deep voice, "They attacked here. Something's wrong. Everyone be careful." He leaned over to look at another corpse and said in a deep voice, "It's vampires. There are vampires here. Be careful." The paladin whispered, took out a shield to protect the others, and said in a deep voice, "There may be their leader below. This place is full of evil. It's very likely to be the vampire's lair. They have corrupted the nobles here." The group quickly set up a standard battle formation, and then carefully moved inside. But the deeper they went, the more surprised they were because there were all corpses inside, and there was not a single living person at all. And the way these corpses died was very strange. They even saw the body of a vampire and a believer of the unseen died directly together. It seemed that they were killed at the same time. The killing method was quite sophisticated, and many of them were killed in one blow. "There's a master." The ranger's expression was serious, and he murmured, "I'm afraid it's a legendary master." The priestess heard this thoughtfully. The others also looked at each other and couldn't help but speed up because they guessed something. Finally, they saw Soren. He was wiping his curved sword on a corpse. After seeing the group of people, there was no surprise on his face. Instead, he reached out and groped the corpse a few times, and said in a deep voice, "It's all settled. But there should be a few fish that escaped the net. P.S. First update, there's another chapter today." Chapter 375. The light of dawn shone down. The luxurious mansion from yesterday had been reduced to ruins. The young priestess was negotiating with a middle-aged man who looked like the captain of the guards. She took out a badge that represented the light of dawn and the badge that the Church of Glory had assigned to her as proof. In the eyes of ordinary people, the Church of Glory had a high status because they stood on the side of good and justice no matter what. There were many bodies of vampires in the ruins, and she believed that it would not be a problem for her to deal with this matter. Soren sat on the roof and played with an emblem, or rather, a coat of arms. This was found from the body of the unseen. It was engraved with a huge beholder, but unlike other beholders, its eye stalks were all cut off. The eyeballs on its tentacles were cut off one by one. Even the huge eye in the middle of its body was dug out cruelly. It opened its bloody mouth and stared in front of it. Its empty and bloody eye sockets were surrounded by a mass of twisted flesh and blood, as well as something that could not be described. Evil Eye Tyrant? Soren carefully observed the emblem and murmured, "It turns out that the predecessor of the unseen was the Evil Eye Tyrant. Who defeated this monster with a challenge rating of 25? And dug out its eyes? It seems that it has embarked on the path of an evil god. Evil Eye Tyrant. A very terrible creature in the evolution of the beholder. Its strength was even stronger than the Dead Eye Tyrant. This was a variant of the beholder. There were only a few in the entire multiverse. Although Soren had been in contact with the unseen in the past, it was the first time he had gotten such an emblem. The rogue should be a core member of the unseen organization. A monster with a creature level close to 30 was preparing to become a god. The chaos must have just begun. In history, no beholder had succeeded in becoming a god. Soren was not sure if this guy had succeeded because no one had seen the real body of this evil god. Patter. When the priestess finished negotiating with the town guard, Soren also came down from the roof. It's been negotiated. The priestess's expression was a little strange. She looked at Soren and said, "We have sent someone to inform the witch council. I think someone will come to deal with it soon. I don't think they want a large number of vampires in their territory." Soren nodded and tossed the emblem to her. "You're leaving?" The priestess raised her head and asked. Soren glanced at her and smiled. "Yes, it is. There are other things that need to be dealt with." Angelia nodded and said softly, "I hope we'll have the chance to meet again. I miss Vivian." Soren smiled. Then he turned and walked out of Withered Leaf Town. He had killed so many vampires and believers of the unseen, some of whom were nobles. This matter must be explained to the witch council. They had to stay and explain everything to the witch council before they could leave. Otherwise, the witch council was likely to be angry because of the death of a noble. Even the people of the Church of Radiance did not dare to offend this group of powerful witches. Soren didn't have time to stay here. Angelia and the others would have to wait for at least 3 days to deal with the follow-up work of these matters. Punishing the evil and encouraging the good and then walking away would only lead to greater chaos. There were still many trivial matters here. If a noble was corrupted by a vampire, the problems that would be implicated in the end would probably cause a lot of damage to the nearby nobles. But that should be a headache for the vampire church. Soren directly crossed the north. With the help of Fly, he crossed the ice and snow mountains and returned to this cold country again. The ice and snow here had not melted yet. Soren followed the route in his memory and went to a small town near Glacier City. When he left the north, he passed by here. Winter Spring Town. It seemed to be called this name. It was a town between Glacier City and Arendelle, with a population of thousands of households. It was not a big place, but not a small one. After sleeping outside for a few days, Soren was ready to spend the night here, so he went directly to the hotel after entering the town. The passers-by were in a hurry. In just a few months, it seemed that panic had spread to this cold world. The town guard stopped Soren and asked a few questions, then warned him not to cause trouble and let him go. It seems that something has happened. Soren glanced at the nervous guards and then entered the tavern. There was news he wanted to know. In fact, the news had already spread. It was just that because of the distance, it did not reach Soren's hands in time. After all, the Frost Kingdom was too far away from the south coast. What Soren was worried about finally happened. Without the protection of the Princess Royal, Arendelle's wealth brought disaster to them. About a week ago, shortly after Soren received the news from the Frost Kingdom, Arendelle was attacked by the enemy. Not only were the Vrykul pirates entrenched in the ice islands outside the sea, but even the southern island countries also launched an attack on them. Arendelle's port was blocked. The war had not yet broken out. The fleet of the southern island countries only joined with the Vrykul pirates to ambush Arendelle's warship, temporarily cutting off the route of the Frost Kingdom. The port was blocked. This was the precursor to the outbreak of war. After the news spread, even other places were affected. There was a lot of discussion in the tavern. Some merchants complained that after the port was blocked, all the goods could not be shipped out. But more discussions were about how Princess Anna of Arendelle would deal with the crisis. Ha! Have you heard? A bearded merchant who had obviously drunk a lot burped and looked at the others. I heard that the person who led the fleet to block the port of Arendelle is a prince of the southern island country. This shameless bandit made a very rude request after blocking the port. Request? Soren, who was sitting in the corner, frowned. He glanced at the middle-aged merchant who deliberately kept others in suspense. He took out a kindler and threw it over. He said in a deep voice, "What request?" "I don't like to listen to people beating around the bush, or I'll break your neck." The middle-aged merchant quickly reached out and caught the kindler, then swallowed and said, "I also heard it from others. The prince of the southern island country seems to be called Hans T. He sent a messenger and said, if Princess Anna agrees to marry him, he will order the removal of Arendelle's blockade. Otherwise, Arendelle's ships will not be able to leave." Crack. The wine glass in Soren's hand shattered, and a cold murderous look appeared on his face. He said in a deep voice, "Are you sure?" "Yes, yes." The middle-aged merchant was startled by him, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He seemed to have sobered up a lot, and his speech gradually became clearer. "I also heard it from others. I have a relative who works in Arendelle." Soren's eyes became colder when he heard this. He casually threw a kindler on the bar, then turned and walked out of the tavern. It was getting late. Soren's figure entered the night and soon disappeared into the vast night. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.